What if Naruto Uzumaki was given one final chance to rewrite history? After living a long life as the 7th Hokage, Naruto stands alone against an ancient enemy threatening to destroy the very fabric of the shinobi world. With nothing left to lose, he makes the ultimate sacrifice, saving everyone he loves. But instead of finding peace, he opens his eyes to the impossible. He's no longer an old man. He's a newborn baby once again. This time, Naruto remembers everything. Every victory, every mistake, every friend he couldn't save, every war that stole the people he loved. Armed with 60 years of experience and a future only he remembers, Naruto vows to change destiny itself. Can one man rewrite history? Or will fate repeat the same tragic cycle? This is the story of What If Old Man Naruto Was Reborn with All His Memories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The old man on the hill did not look like a legend anymore. He looked like what he was, tired, gray-haired, and alone against a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Naruto Uzumaki had been called many things over the course of his long life. The hero of the hidden leaf. The child of prophecy. The 7th Hokage. Somewhere in the wide world, children still drew pictures of him with 9 glowing tails fanned out behind him like some kind of avenging spirit, and old men in tea houses still argued about which of his battles had been the greatest. None of that mattered up here, on a nameless ridge 2 days' hard travel from the nearest village, with the wind screaming across broken stone and the thing he had come to stop rising out of the earth like a second, wrong-colored moon. You don't have to keep fighting, the thing said. It didn't have a mouth, not really, just a suggestion of one, a tear in the world shaped vaguely like a smile. You're an old man. Your children have children. Rest. I've heard that speech before, Naruto said. His voice came out rougher than he remembered it sounding in his own head. Age did that, turned a voice into something borrowed. From guys a lot scarier than you. He didn't say the names. He didn't need to. Sasuke once. Madara, before that. Kaguya, at the very bottom of everything. He had beaten all of them, and every time some new horror had eventually shown up wearing the ashes of the old ones, as if the world simply could not stay still, could not stay safe, no matter how many times he swept the porch. This one called itself nothing. It had crawled up out of a fault line beneath the old Yuzushiogaki ruins, a wound in reality that something ancient and starving had finally found its way through. The scholars back at the village, his village, still his village even now, even with a different name stitched onto the Hokage's hat, had spent 6 months trying to name it and failed. In the end it didn't matter what you called the hole. It mattered that you closed it. Naruto planted his feet. His knees complained. Everything complained these days. That was the tax you paid for outliving your own mythology. He thought absurdly of ramen, of how Tuchi's grandson made the broth thinner than the old man used to, and how Naruto had never once told him so because the kid tried so hard and smiled so much like his grandfather had. He thought of Hinata's hands warm even at the end. He thought of Sasuke standing at the edge of a grave that wasn't his own, not saying thank you, because Sasuke never said thank you, but staying anyway, which was the same thing in a different language. He thought, I am so tired. He thought, that's fine. I get to be tired. The kids don't have to be. Kurama's voice rumbled up from somewhere far beneath his ribs, worn soft with age the way old friends' voices get. You're doing the thing again. The speech in your head thing. You always do this right before you do something monumentally stupid. Not stupid, Naruto thought back. Just expensive. Same thing with you. He almost laughed. Hadn't laughed in what felt like days, up here on this cold ridge with the world tearing open in front of him. It felt good, even at the very end. Maybe especially at the very end. Last chance, the thing said, patient as erosion. Walk away. Nah, Naruto said, and began to build the seal. It was not a technique from any scroll. It didn't have a school, a lineage, a proper name. He built it himself over the last 2 years out of pieces of things he learned from Minato's notes, from the old Uzumaki sealing archives Karen had helped him translate, from something Kurama remembered about the very first seal ever wound around a tailed beast's freedom, back when the fox had been young and furious and not yet a friend. It would not just imprison the thing tearing through the fault line, it would close the wound behind it, stitch the two worlds back into one, the way you'd cauterize a cut too deep for bandages. It would also, near as Naruto had been able to calculate with Shikamaru glaring at charts for 3 straight weeks, take a life to power the closing stitch. A big one. A whole one. Not a percentage, not a portion he could pay off across some other year. The whole thing, spent all at once, like breaking a piggy bank open on the floor. He told exactly one person the full truth of what he was planning. Hinata had cried, and then she had helped him refine the hand seals anyway, because she understood, had always understood, better than anyone, that some things you did not because you wanted to, but because if you didn't, someone else would have to, and it should never, ever be a child. Ready? He asked Kurama. I have been ready for 60 years, brat. Get on with it before I change my mind and eat you myself. Chakra roared up through him, red and gold and warm as summer, and for one perfect, blazing instant Naruto Uzumaki felt exactly as strong as every legend ever told about him. Then the world came apart at the seams, and everything went white. There was no ground to stand on, and yet he was standing. There was no sky, and yet there was a kind of light, soft and directionless, the color of the moment just before dawn when the world hasn't decided yet whether it's going to be gray or gold. Naruto had been to strange places before. He'd walked through the belly of a 9-tailed fox's memory. He'd stood on the shifting, colorless ground of a realm where the first ninja on earth had once made his home, listening to a being with rippling eyes explain the shape of chakra itself. He knew, on some old instinct honed by decades of surviving impossible things, that wherever he was now, it was not entirely unlike those places. It had that same sense of being underneath the ordinary world, a room behind the wallpaper. You did it, said a voice, and it did not come from any one direction so much as from everywhere at once, the way sound moves through water. Naruto turned, or did something that felt like turning, since there wasn't exactly a body to pivot, and saw a figure standing a little ways off. Old, bald, or shaven, robed in something the color of unbleached cloth, a staff with rings that did not chime, planted in ground that did not exist. Naruto had seen this face before, in visions and memories not entirely his own, passed down through the long chain of Jinchuriki and sages that stretched back to the beginning of everything. He knew who this was. He also knew, with the same old, stubborn certainty that had once made him refuse to bow to a certain pale-eyed man calling himself divine, that he was not going to use any of the grand titles history books like to hang on this person. Naruto had learned a long time ago that calling someone a god just gave them permission to start acting like one, and this world had had more than enough of that particular problem. Old man, Naruto said instead, which felt disrespectful and also exactly right. Did I close it? The hole? You closed it. The figure's mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. The wound is sealed. Your world is safe. Your village will wake tomorrow and the sky over Yazushio will simply be sky again, and in a week no one but the scholars will remember there was ever a hole in it at all. Relief went through Naruto like warm water. He hadn't realized how much of himself he'd been holding in a clenched fist until it unclenched. Good, he said. That's good. That's all I wanted. You paid for it with everything you had. Yeah, well. Naruto shrugged, an old habit, a young man's gesture on an old man's soul. Wasn't using it for much else these days. Kids are grown. Grandkids don't need me to teach them the Rasengan, they've got their own teachers now. I did my part. I got to see it all, got to watch the village grow up into something even Old Man Third would have been proud of. That's more than most people get. You are remarkably unbothered, the figure observed, for a man who has just died. I've died before, Naruto said, and it wasn't quite a joke. Something that might have been amusement flickered across that ancient, weathered face. So you have. And in every one of your lives before this one, yes, before, there is a longer thread here than you know, though I will not unspool the whole of it for you now. You have made the same choice, over and over, in different shapes. You give yourself away. You call it living. Others might call it something closer to drowning slowly, on purpose, for the sake of people who can't see you doing it. Naruto opened his mouth to argue and then, strangely, found he didn't want to. There was something in the observation that landed too true to fight. So what happens now? He asked instead. Is this it? Do I get to see everybody? Jiraiya-sensei, and my mom and dad and, if you wish, the figure said. That door is open to you, and it will not close. There is no hurry where you are standing. Time does not press on the dead the way it presses on the living. Something in the way that was phrased made Naruto go still. But there's another door too. Isn't there? That's why you're here and not just, whatever happens next happening. The old figure inclined his head, and for the first time something like genuine weight entered his voice. There is a rarer offering. It is not made to every soul, or even to most. The world does not need every soul returned to the beginning of its own story, and there is a cruelty in it that should not be dressed up as a gift. But you, Naruto Uzumaki, have carried more of this world's weight across more of its turning points than almost any soul in its long memory, and you have done it, every time, imperfectly, with grief you did not resolve, with people you could not save, with wounds you patched instead of healing. I can send you back, not to relive what you have already lived, moment for moment, like a puppet retracing old string, but back to the beginning of this particular thread, this particular life, with the whole of what you know intact. Your memories. Your strength, insofar as a body that young can hold it. A second cradle, and a second dawn. Naruto's chest, if he had a chest here, if the word even meant anything in this white nowhere, tightened. Why me, he said. Not why would you do that, not is this real, but the older, harder question, the one that had sat under every honor and every title his whole life like a stone under a rug. There's gotta be 100 people who deserve it more. People who died before they got to fix anything. Kids. People who never even got a first chance, let alone thinking about a second one. Perhaps. The figure did not flinch from the question, which Naruto respected, in a distant sort of way, even through the vertigo of it all. I did not say this was a reward, Naruto. I said it was a rare offering, and I will say now that it is also a burden, and I am not entirely certain it is a kindness. You will carry 60 years of grief into a body 3 days old. You will watch people you love die who do not yet know they are your friends. You will know, before it happens, exactly how much it will cost you to change even one single thing, and you may find, in the end, that some griefs cannot be outrun no matter how far back you run from them. I am not offering you a clean slate. I am offering you the same slate, with a second chance to write on it, and no guarantee at all that the ink will take differently the second time. Naruto was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the fault line healing shut over Yazushio, and the village waking up tomorrow, not knowing how close it had come to unmaking. He thought about how tired he had been, at the end, in a way that had nothing to do with old bones. He thought, and this was the thought that finally decided him, the one that rose up out of everything else like a fish breaking the surface of still water, about a boy with whiskers on his cheeks and no parents and a fox sealed in his belly, screaming into an empty apartment because nobody had ever once told him it was going to be okay. He thought about Itachi, standing at the edge of a clan he loved, choosing a massacre because no one had built him a bridge to any other choice. He thought about Nagato, and Obito, and Gaara before Gaara had learned what it felt like to be wanted. He thought, I know things now that I didn't know then. I know what all that pain turns into, if nobody stops it in time. What if I could just be there? Early. Before it has to happen at all. He thought, what if nobody else has to lose what I lost, to learn what I had to learn? Okay, Naruto said. I'll do it. You understand there is no undoing this choice, once made. Yeah. A faint, crooked smile found its way onto whatever passed for his face in this white nowhere. I've never been real good at undoing my choices anyway. Ask anybody who's ever tried to talk me out of something. The old figure studied him for a long moment, long enough that Naruto had the strange sensation of being weighed, the way you might weigh a coin between two fingers to see if it rang true. Then he nodded, once, and lifted the ring staff, and the white nowhere began, very gently, to come apart at its seams. One more thing, the figure said, as the light began to pull apart into threads, as the shape of Naruto's borrowed old man body began to feel less and less like the truest shape of him. The fox will remember none of this. He will wake beside you as he woke the first time, new to the seal, weary, wounded, without the 60 years of friendship you built between you. You will have to build it again, from nothing, the same as everything else. That landed harder than anything else the old figure had said. Naruto had almost forgotten, in the vertigo of the offer, that going back meant everyone went back, not just the people he'd get to save, but the people he'd have to lose all over again in exactly the ways he already knew were coming, unless he found some way to stop it. Kurama, wary and furious and 13 years away from trusting him. His parents, already gone, their faces preserved only in memory, and a handful of old photographs and one desperate conversation inside a seal that hadn't happened yet, and now might never happen the same way, twice. That's okay, Naruto said quietly, to the dissolving light, to the old figure, to nobody at all. I know how to make a friend out of a fox. I've done it once already. I can do it again. The last thing he heard, as the white nowhere folded itself down to a single bright point and then to nothing at all, was something that might have been the old figure's voice, or might have simply been the sound of a new life beginning. Then go, and be gentle with the boy you're about to become. He has already survived so much, and does not yet know it. The first thing Naruto understood, coming back into the world, was that everything was enormous, not metaphorically. Not in the way people said things like the world felt so big when I was young, actually, literally, physically enormous. A ceiling that stretched up into a haze he couldn't focus his eyes on, walls that receded into a blur of pale color, sounds that boomed and roared and crashed around him with no shape to them at all, just noise, wave after wave of undifferentiated noise pressing in on him from every side. His first instinct, 60-some years of shinobi training screaming up through whatever was left of muscle memory, was to orient. Find the exits. Assess the threat level. Locate allies. His body would not cooperate even a little bit. He tried to sit up and discovered he did not currently possess the necessary coordination to sit up. He tried to focus his eyes and discovered his eyes did not yet know how to focus, that the whole world was a wash of light and shadow with no hard edges anywhere, like trying to read a scroll underwater. He tried to speak, to say something, anything, even just his own name, just to hear that the connection between thought and voice still worked. And what came out instead was an enormous, humiliating, entirely involuntary wail. Oh no, thought 60 years of hard-won shinobi wisdom, trapped inside a body that could not yet hold up its own head. Oh, this is bad. This is so much worse than I thought it would be, he cried. He cried because his body cried, because some deep infant instinct had decided that crying was the correct response to existing. And there did not appear to be any part of the control panel that let him override it. Distantly, through the haze, he heard footsteps, quick, light, familiar in a way he couldn't place, and then the enormous blurry world tilted sharply as something lifted him. Sure, it's all right, little one. A woman's voice, warm and a little frayed at the edges with exhaustion. Not his mother's voice. He knew that immediately, with a small ache, because some part of him that would never stop being an orphan had hoped, just for one unreasonable half-second, that it might be. There. You've had quite the few days, haven't you? He was rocked, gently, against a shoulder that smelled of clean cloth and something faintly herbal. Disinfectant, maybe, or one of the healing salves the hospital staff used. The rocking helped. Some very old and very berry part of him, a part that had nothing to do with 60 years of jutsu and battle scars and had everything to do with simply being a small creature held by a kind adult, began to settle. Okay, Naruto thought, once the crying had wound down into hiccuping little breaths. Okay. Think. You are a baby. You have the mind of a man in his 60s trapped in a body that can't even focus its eyes yet. This is either the single stupidest situation you have ever been in, or the single most important, and possibly both at the same time. Congratulations. Assess the situation. He couldn't see well yet. Infant eyes he remembered now from some corner of half-forgotten parenting conversations with Hinata over the years. Took weeks to develop anything like proper focus. He couldn't move with any purpose. He couldn't speak. He was, in every practical sense, entirely at the mercy of whoever was holding him right now, and that fact alone sent a cold, entirely rational spike of fear through him that had nothing to do with infant hormones and everything to do with a lifetime of knowing exactly how dangerous the world could be to someone who couldn't defend themselves. But he could listen. And he could think. And carefully, gently, like reaching a hand down into dark water, he could feel for something else. Something warm and enormous and coiled tight beneath his own tiny ribs, banked low like a fire someone had smothered too fast. Kurama, he thought, reaching for that old, familiar presence with all the care of a man reaching toward a half-tamed animal he loved very much and had once, a lifetime ago, been afraid of. "Hey! You in there?" Nothing answered. Not a growl, not a flicker of recognition, not even the irritated silence that had sometimes passed for a greeting in the early years of their old, entire, decades-long friendship. Just a vast, sullen quiet, like standing at the mouth of a cave and knowing something large and wounded slept just out of sight inside it. Right, Naruto thought, with a pang that surprised him with how sharp it was. Right. He doesn't know me yet. We haven't done any of it yet. All that, all those years, all that trust, none of that's happened for him. As far as he's concerned right now, he just got dragged out of his old prison and stuffed into some human infant 3 days after tearing a village apart. And everyone who ever wronged him is still exactly as much a stranger to him as I am. It hurt more than he expected. He had genuinely, without quite realizing it until this exact moment, thought of Kurama as one of his oldest friends for so long that some part of him had forgotten there had ever been a time before that friendship existed. Now here he was, back at the very beginning of it, and the fox on the other side of the seal was nothing but a wounded, furious stranger who had every reason in the world to hate him. Okay, Naruto thought again, steadying himself the way he'd steadied himself 1,000 times before a fight he wasn't sure he could win. Okay. I know how this story goes. I've lived it once already. I know what it takes to earn that trust. I did it before, I can do it again, and this time I get to start earlier, do it kinder, do it better. This isn't a setback. It's just the start of the same climb, one more time. The woman holding him shifted, and Naruto, still crying in soft, winding down hiccups, still unable to control so much as the muscles in his own face, heard a second set of footsteps approach, heavier, slower, carrying with them a particular quality of quiet authority that every shinobi in the room seemed to instinctively make space for. "How is he settling in?" asked a voice Naruto knew instantly, and it hit him like a physical blow, right in the center of a chest too small to properly hold 60 years of grief. "Old man," Hiruzen Sarutobi's voice. Younger than Naruto had ever heard it in his old life. No, that wasn't quite right, was it? This was young Hiruzen, the third Hokage in the years before the weight of 2 more decades had bent his shoulders and grayed the last of his hair entirely white. Naruto had watched this man die twice, in 2 different ways, in his first life, once slowly, of age and grief, and once suddenly, brutally, at the hands of his own former student in a fight that Naruto, 7 years old and helpless in a hospital bed, had not even been allowed to witness. Every instinct Naruto had wanted badly to reach for that voice, to grab at the man's robes with tiny useless fists and say, "What? I'm sorry I couldn't save you the first time. I'm going to try so much harder this time. Please don't die again. Please let me be old enough to help before it happens." All of it utterly, hopelessly beyond the capacity of an infant 3 days into a second life to actually communicate. "Restless, Hokage-sama," the woman holding him said. "He's cried on and off most of the day. The healers say it's within normal range, given everything he's been through, though of course he won't remember any of it." You'd be surprised, Naruto thought, with something that was almost a laugh, if a laugh could exist inside a body that hadn't figured out yet how laughing worked. "May I?" Hiruzen asked, and the woman must have nodded, because a moment later Naruto felt himself being transferred, carefully, so carefully, with the practiced gentleness of a man who had held a great many children in his long life as Hokage, comforted a great many grieving families, and never once let any of it make him careless, into a new pair of arms. Up close, even through the swimming blur of newborn vision, Naruto could make out the broad shape of the Hokage robes, the dark line of a hat's brim, the warm brown of a face lined with far fewer years of worry than Naruto remembered it carrying. This Hiruzen still had most of his hair. This Hiruzen had not yet watched a village burn under his own weakened watch, had not yet had to choose, again and again, between the village's safety and the safety of one small orphan boy nobody else wanted to look at directly. "Hello, little one," Hiruzen said softly, and there was something in his voice, a weight, a carefulness, the sound of a man choosing his words even for an audience of one who couldn't possibly understand them, that made something in Naruto's chest ache fiercely. "I am sorry." I am so sorry for what was taken from you 3 days ago, and sorrier still that I cannot give it back. You don't have anything to apologize for, Naruto wanted to say, and found himself instead making a small, unintentional sound, somewhere between a whimper and a coo, that seemed to catch the old Hokage's attention. There now, Hiruzen murmured, adjusting his hold, and for a moment his thumb brushed gently across the whisker marks on Naruto's cheek, the marks the seal had left, the ones that would follow him his whole life, the ones Naruto had once, a very long time from now, in a life that hadn't happened yet, worn with something like pride. Strange marks, for such a small face to carry. I wonder what sort of man you'll grow to be, wearing them. The kind who becomes Hokage, Naruto thought, with a fierceness that startled him. The kind who ends a war and builds a peace that lasts. And this time I'm going to build it without losing half the people I love along the way. I already paid that price once. I know exactly what it costs. I'm not paying it twice. Aloud, of course. All Naruto could manage was another small, hiccuping sound, and Hiruzen's face, even blurred, even indistinct through eyes too new to properly see, softened into something that might, in a better light, have been the beginning of a smile. Rest now, the old Hokage said, and settled Naruto back into the woman's waiting arms with obvious reluctance, the reluctance of a busy man who had a village to run and had, nonetheless, wanted just a moment longer with a small, orphaned, marked child he already suspected the world was not finished testing. I will look in on him again soon, see that he wants for nothing the orphanage can provide. Yes, Hokage-sama. The footsteps retreated. The blurry shape of the Hokage's robes dissolved back into the general wash of color and light that was, for now, the entire visible universe. Naruto, 3 days old, 60-some years wise, utterly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with muscles that hadn't yet learned to hold him upright, felt the pull of infant sleep dragging at the edges of his borrowed consciousness like an undertow, and for a moment fought it out of pure old habit, the reflex of a man who had learned the hard way that sleeping in unsecured places got people killed. Then, slowly, deliberately, he let himself stop fighting it. It's fine, he told himself, as the light began to fade at the edges. There's no war on. Not yet. Not for years. You've got time. For the first time in longer than you can remember, you've actually got time. The last thing he was aware of, before sleep finally pulled him all the way under, was the low, wordless rumble of something enormous and wounded, stirring faintly in the deep dark water beneath his ribs, as if it too had felt, for just a moment, something almost like being comforted. Days blurred into each other in a way that Naruto found, once he'd had time to adjust to it, both maddening and strangely restful. There was no clock to watch, no missions to plan, no enemies at the gate. There was only the small, repetitive, entirely humbling rhythm of infancy, sleep, and hunger, and the slow, agonizingly incremental process of his own body learning to do things it had already known how to do once, in a different pair of hands, 6 decades ago. He hated it, some days. Hated the total loss of control, the way an itch on his own nose could become an ordeal because his hands didn't yet answer reliably to his intentions, the way a wave of hunger could hit with such force that his infant mind, however stubbornly adult underneath, simply could not outthink the crying that followed. He'd faced down S-rank missing need without flinching. He'd stood alone against beings who reshaped the world with a thought, and here he was, reduced to sobbing because his own fist wouldn't cooperate with his desire to touch his own face. Humbling, he thought, more than once, with the particular dry humor of a man who had learned a long time ago that the alternative to laughing at your own misfortune was drowning in it. This is what humbling means. I get it now. Message received. But there was a quieter, gentler current running underneath the frustration too, one he hadn't expected and didn't entirely know what to do with. There was something almost sacred about being held. About the orphanage caretaker. Her name, he learned from listening carefully to the staff talk among themselves, was Atsuko, a broad, tired, endlessly patient woman who had clearly buried more grief than she let show on her face, humming some half-remembered lullaby while she fed him, off-key and unself-conscious, the way you only sing when you think no one who matters is listening. There was something almost holy about sunlight through a window, about the particular blue of a sky he'd once watched burn, now simply and uncomplicatedly blue. He had lived a long life, the first time. He had loved it, mostly, even through all its grief. But he had forgotten, genuinely, completely forgotten, in the way you forget the exact taste of a food you haven't eaten in years, what it felt like to experience the world with absolutely no defenses up. To simply be, without calculating threat levels, without triaging who around him needed protecting first. It wouldn't last. He knew that better than almost anyone alive, or anyone who had ever been alive, this particular way, in this particular unrepeatable loop of a life. There were things coming, things he remembered with perfect, aching clarity, a masked man's plans, a village's slow unraveling, wars that hadn't happened yet, and, if he was smart, careful, and lucky in roughly equal measure, might never happen at all. But not yet. Not today. Today there was only the sound of Atsuko humming, and sunlight, and the long, slow, patient work of learning to hold his own head up. He spent what felt like weeks, though newborn time's sense was notoriously unreliable, even for a 60-year-old mind wearing it like an ill-fitting coat, simply listening. This was, he decided early on, going to be his primary tool for the foreseeable future, since it was more or less the only tool actually available to him. Infants could not ask questions. Infants could, however, listen with total, unembarrassed attention to every conversation that happened anywhere near them, because no adult in the history of the world had ever thought to censor themselves in front of a baby. He learned, this way, that the date was what he'd expected, 3 days after the Kyuubi's rampage, in the very earliest days of a peace that, in his memory, held for exactly 12 more years before Sasuke's defection cracked the first hairline fracture through it. He learned that Minato and Kushina's deaths were being spoken of, among the orphanage staff, in careful, hushed tones reserved for tragedy too recent and too raw to discuss plainly, the fourth Hokage's sacrifice already wrapped in the beginnings of legend, his wife's name spoken more rarely, more quietly, as if grief for her existed on a slightly different shelf than grief for him. He learned that the village was still counting its dead, still rebuilding walls, still deciding, in 100 small bureaucratic ways he only half understood, even with 60 years of political experience behind his newborn eyes, what to do with the orphaned son of the man who had saved them and the woman most of them had never known well enough to properly mourn. He learned, with a fresh, cold ache each time, exactly how alone he already was in this world, for the second time. And he learned, slowly, patiently, the way you learn to approach a wounded animal without startling it, how to reach for Kurama. It took what felt, by his best internal reckoning, like nearly 2 weeks before Kurama responded to him with anything more than that low, wounded, wordless growl. Naruto didn't push. That was the first lesson, and the one he was proudest of remembering correctly this time around, because he had pushed, the first time, all those years ago, back when he was young and furious and had no context at all for the enormous grief coiled up inside his own seal. He had screamed at Kurama, demanded chakra, treated the fox, for years, as a weapon first and a prisoner second and never, not once, as a person, until circumstances forced the two of them together in a cave and grief cracked them both open at the same time. He didn't have years to waste doing it wrong a second time. But more than that, and this was the part that surprised him, sitting with it in the long, quiet hours of infant wakefulness, he genuinely didn't want to. He remembered, with total clarity, exactly how much Kurama had suffered before Naruto had ever been born. Centuries of being ripped from host to host, weaponized, feared, hated, blamed for violence he'd never chosen to commit. He remembered the particular loneliness in Kurama's voice, all those decades later, when the fox had finally, haltingly, admitted that Naruto was the first person who had ever simply asked him his name. I get to do that early this time, Naruto thought, floating somewhere in the hazy middle distance between waking and sleeping that made up most of an infant's day. I get to just skip straight to the good part. Why would I waste that? So instead of pushing, he waited. And when he reached inward, into that dark water where Kurama's presence coiled low and wary, he did it the way you'd approach a stray who'd been kicked too many times to trust an open hand, slowly, without sudden movement, without demand. Hey, he thought, the first time he tried actual words instead of just presence. I don't know if you can hear me yet. I know you're hurting. I know you got dragged into this without anybody asking you what you wanted, same as me, honestly. I just wanted you to know, I'm not gonna be like the others. I'm not gonna try to use you. I don't want anything from you except I don't know. Company, maybe. It's pretty lonely in here, being 3 weeks old. Nothing answered for a long time. Naruto kept trying anyway, a little each day, never long, never insistent. A few words before sleep took him, a quiet greeting in the mornings, small and unhurried, the verbal equivalent of leaving food out for a wary animal, and then simply walking away and letting it come in its own time. Then, one evening, Naruto had lost track of the exact count of days by then, though he guessed he was close to a month old. Something shifted. "You keep talking," said a voice, low and rough and enormous, even reduced to a whisper, the first words Kurama had spoken to him in this life. "Why do you keep talking? I am not answering you." Naruto felt something in his chest, his actual, tiny, infant chest, loosen with relief so sharp it startled him. "You just did, though." A pause. Then, with unmistakable irritation, "That does not count." "Sure it does." Naruto let himself smile, an actual, physical smile, wobbly and mostly involuntary, but real. Somewhere in the room, Atsuko, changing his blanket, made a small delighted sound at the sight of it and murmured something about his first smile to the other caretaker on shift, entirely unaware of the much stranger conversation actually happening. "I'm not gonna stop talking to you, by the way. Might as well get used to it. Humans always want something," Kurama said, and there was old bitterness in it, deep enough that Naruto could feel the edges of centuries of grief packed into those 5 words. "Sealing masters, village leaders. Your father put me back in this cage not 2 weeks past. I felt his chakra. I know his hand in this seal even now, wearing his sun's shape around me like a second prison. Do not pretend to me that you want nothing. Everyone who has ever spoken kindly to me first has wanted something eventually." Naruto held that for a moment, turning it over the way he'd have turned over an opponent's opening move, looking for the true shape underneath the words. "Okay," he said finally, gently. "I get why you think that. I'm not gonna pretend I don't understand why. But I'm telling you the truth, I don't want your chakra. I don't want you to fight for me. I don't even need you to like me, not yet, not for a long time if that's what it takes. I just don't think anybody should have to be alone with something that big and that painful inside them. And I figure, we're stuck together either way, right? Might as well not make each other more miserable than we have to." The silence that followed was long enough that Naruto genuinely didn't expect an answer. He drifted, half toward sleep, listening to Atsuko's off-key humming somewhere out in the real, waking world, warm and safe and entirely undefended in a way he still hadn't gotten used to. Then, right at the edge of sleep, so quiet he almost missed it. "What is your name, then? If you are so determined to talk to me, I would at least like to know what to call the fool doing it." Something in Naruto's chest, small, an infant, and impossibly, achingly full, nearly broke open with how much that one small question meant to him. "Naruto," he said. "Naruto Uzumaki. And you're Kurama?" "I know that already, but I figured you might want to be the one to say it, this time." Another silence. Shorter this time. Less guarded. "How?" Kurama said slowly, suspicion threading every syllable. "Do you already know my name?" "That," Naruto said, and let himself, for the first time since waking in this small, borrowed, unfinished body, feel something like genuine hope. "Is a really, really long story. I've got time to tell it, though. I've got nothing but time." He did not tell Kurama everything, that first real conversation, or even in the weeks that followed. Some things, he'd learned the hard way over 60 years, needed to be earned in pieces, not dumped all at once on someone who had no context yet for trusting the person doing the telling. So he told it slowly, a little at a time, in the long quiet hours between feedings and sleep, framing it the only way that felt honest, not as prophecy, not as certainty, but as memory. "I remember a life," he told the fox, "where things went a certain way. I don't know if they'll go that way again, now that I'm here different, and doing things different. But I remember it, and some of what I remember is you, and I liked who we became. I'd like to get there again, if you'll let me. Faster this time. Kinder this time." Kurama did not believe him, not fully, not for a long while. That was fine. Naruto hadn't expected belief right away. Trust, real trust, was built out of consistency stacked over time, the same slow brick-by-brick process it had always been, in any life. What mattered was that the fox kept talking to him anyway, gruff and suspicious and increasingly, despite himself, curious. The way you keep circling back to a puzzle even when you've decided you don't care about solving it. Naruto used the rest of his strange, borrowed patience on watching the world outside the seal, too. He watched Atsuko's face when she thought no one important was looking, the particular tiredness of someone managing grief for children who weren't even hers, on top of a village's collective grief for a war that had ended only days before he'd first opened his eyes in it. He listened to the other caretakers talk about rationing, about repairs, about which clans had lost members and which had, by luck or strength, come through mostly whole. He filed all of it away, the way he'd once filed away troop movements and enemy positions, except this time the enemy wasn't a person or an army. This time the thing he was preparing to fight was simply time itself, the slow, grinding, unstoppable momentum of history repeating its worst mistakes unless someone stepped in early enough to redirect it. He thought, often, in the long unstructured hours of infancy, about everyone he intended to save. He thought about Itachi, 13 years old and already carrying weight no child should carry, years away yet from the night that would break his clan and his own heart in the same terrible motion. I have time, Naruto reminded himself, each time the thought of that night rose up sharp and unbearable in his memory. I have years before that happens. Years to build whatever bridge might stop it. I don't have to fix it today. I just have to not waste the years I've got. He thought about Gaara, a newborn himself somewhere out in the sand, about to grow up inside a loneliness so total it would nearly break him before Naruto, the first time around, had ever managed to reach him. You won't have to wait as long this time, Naruto promised, silently, to a boy who didn't know he existed yet. I remember what it cost you to wait. I'm not gonna make you wait that long again. He thought about Sasuke, and Sakura, and Kakashi, and Iruka, and 100 other faces that hadn't yet crossed his path in this new telling of his life, all of them still years away, all of them carrying futures that were, for the first time in his very long existence, genuinely unwritten. And he thought, too, because he had never once, in 60 years, been able to stop himself from thinking about it, about his parents, about Minato, whose chakra Kurama had felt so recently pressing this very seal into shape, about Kushina, whose face Naruto knew only from photographs and a single desperate, overwhelming conversation that had happened once, in another version of this timeline, inside a seal not unlike this one, years and years from now, if it happened at all, this time, changed as everything else now was. I might not get to meet you again the same way, he thought, some nights, quiet and aching in the dark. I might not get the chance to hear you call me your knucklehead son one more time, but I promise I'm gonna make what you gave up worth it. I promise this village is gonna have a better story this time, because you two started it, and I'm not gonna let it end anywhere worse than where you meant it to go. Kurama, more than once, caught the edges of those particular thoughts, drifting close enough to the seal that some of Naruto's grief leaked through despite his best efforts to keep it private. You grieve strangely, the fox observed once, gruffly, in a tone that was trying very hard to sound like it didn't care and mostly succeeding. Like someone remembering a wound instead of receiving one fresh. Yeah, Naruto admitted, too tired in that particular moment to hide it. I guess I do. I do not fully believe your story about the other life. A pause, long enough that Naruto thought that might be the end of it. Then, but I believe that you believe it, and I have lived a very long time, Kit, longer than any human village, and I have never once met a human who grieved a life they hadn't lived yet, unless that grief was real to them regardless. Kit, Naruto repeated, something warm and unexpected catching in his chest at the word. You used to call me that. In the life I remember. Later on. Once we were friends. Kurama made a sound that might, in a fox large enough and old enough and gruff enough, have counted as embarrassed. Do not read too much into it. Too late, Naruto said, and for the first time since waking into this small, strange, unfinished body, he felt something settle inside him. Not certainty, exactly, not safety, not yet, but the first solid brick of something he could build the rest of it on top of. Hiruzen visited again, some weeks later. Naruto had given up trying to count precisely, though he guessed he was close to 2 months old by then, old enough that his eyes had mostly learned to focus, old enough that the world had sharpened from a wash of blur into something closer to actual shapes and faces. The third Hokage came alone this time, without an entourage of aides, dressed down in a plain robe rather than the ceremonial coat, the way Naruto remembered him sometimes visiting the orphanage in his old life too, quietly, almost apologetically, as if he felt some personal responsibility for every child under that roof and could never entirely discharge it with policy alone. "You've grown," Hiruzen said, settling into the chair beside Naruto's crib with the careful economy of movement of a man who had, at various points in his long career, been both a devastating warrior and an exhausted grandfather, sometimes within the same afternoon. "Etsuko tells me you're smiling now. And that you watch people rather intently, for an infant. She finds it a little unsettling, I think, though she'd never say so where you might hear." She's not wrong to find it unsettling, Naruto thought, meeting the old Hokage's gaze with his own, still slightly unfocused, still working, eyes. He couldn't smile on command yet with any reliability, but he let himself try anyway, and something about the shape of it, lopsided, gummy, entirely genuine, seemed to catch Hiruzen somewhere soft. "There he is," Hiruzen murmured, and reached down to let one large, weathered finger rest gently against Naruto's small palm. Naruto. Old instinct, some deep well of trust that had nothing to do with infant reflexes and everything to do with 60 years of knowing exactly what kind of man this was, curled his fingers around it, holding on with as much grip as his month-old hand could manage. Hiruzen went very still. "You have quite a grip, for someone so small," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that suggested he understood, on some level too old and too weary to fully articulate, that this was not an ordinary child settling in an ordinary crib. "Your father had a grip like that too, you know. Even as a boy. Held on to things, people, like he meant it. Never let go of anything he decided mattered." A pause, heavier than the words that came before it. "I think you may take after him more than you know." "I'd like that," Naruto thought, throat tight in a way that had nothing to do with underdeveloped infant anatomy. "I'd really, really like that." "I have decided something," Hiruzen said, after a long moment spent simply sitting with the small hand curled around his finger. "I had planned to keep the truth of your parentage sealed for now, for your protection, given how many enemies your father made in his service to this village, given how much your mother's clan name alone might paint a target on your back before you're old enough to defend yourself. That decision stands for now. But I want you to know, even though you cannot understand me yet, even though these words are, in truth, more for my own conscience than for your ears, that I do not intend to let you grow up unclaimed. You will have my protection, for as long as I hold this office and beyond it if I can arrange it. You will not be forgotten, or discarded, the way this village sometimes discards the things it fears to look at directly." He said it so plainly, so simply, that it took Naruto a moment to fully register the shape of the promise, because in his first life, this exact promise had been made, more or less, and more or less kept, and it had still not been enough. Hiruzen's protection had kept him fed and housed, but it hadn't kept him from years of narrowed eyes and slammed doors, hadn't kept him from being the only child in his class who ate lunch alone more often than not, hadn't kept whispered rumors from finding their way to him no matter how carefully the old Hokage tried to shield him from them. "I know you meant well," Naruto thought, holding tight to that one warm, careful finger. "I know you did everything you could within the limits you had. But this time, I've got a head start you didn't know I'd have. This time I'm not gonna wait around for the village to decide, on its own slow timeline, whether it's ready to love me. I'm gonna go out and make people love me on purpose, the same way I did the first time, except I get to start younger, and I get to skip a lot of the years where I didn't know how." "You're staring at me very intently again," Hiruzen said, with the ghost of a real smile this time, "for someone who can't possibly understand a word I'm saying." "You'd be surprised, old man," Naruto thought, and let his hand tighten just slightly further around that steady, careful finger, and felt, for the first time since waking into this small, strange, unfinished body, something that was not quite peace, not yet, but was close enough to its shape that he thought he might, eventually, learn to call it that. That night, once Hiruzen had gone and the orphanage had settled into its familiar rhythm of quiet, the distant creak of floorboards as Etsuko made her rounds, the soft murmur of the other caretaker's voice reading a bedtime story to an older child down the hall, the far-off sound of Konoha itself, slowly, patiently stitching itself back together after a wound that had nearly ended it. Naruto lay awake in the dark, 60 years of memory pressed up against 2 months of new, unfinished life, and let himself, finally, take stock of everything ahead of him. There was so much. There was so much. There was the Uchiha massacre, still more than a decade away, but already, if he was honest with himself, closer than it felt, because a decade sounded long only until you remembered how fast the years actually moved once you were living them instead of simply remembering them. There was Orochimaru's slow, patient corruption, already quietly underway somewhere in the village's shadowed corners, years before anyone would catch him at it. There was Akatsuki, forming slowly out of the ashes of wars that hadn't fully cooled yet, gathering itself piece by piece toward a purpose that would, in his first life, cost him nearly everyone he loved before it was through. There was Gaara, and Nagato, and Obito, and 100 smaller griefs stitched between the larger ones, every one of them a person Naruto remembered not as history, but as someone he'd once failed to reach in time, someone he had, in this new telling, an actual chance to reach early enough that failure might not be the only ending available to their story. It was, considered all at once, a genuinely overwhelming amount of weight to carry into a body that couldn't yet walk. I know it's a lot, he told Kurama, quietly into the dark. I know I'm asking a lot of both of us, just by being here at all. You are, Kurama agreed, gruff as ever, though something in the tone had softened considerably over the past weeks, worn smooth the way river stone wears smooth under slow, patient water. You are asking a very great deal. Of yourself, most of all. Yeah. Naruto let out a small, infant sigh, and felt, distantly, something like a low chuckle rumble through the seal in response. Not quite a laugh, not yet, but close enough to one that it made something warm bloom in his chest anyway. I've got a plan, though. Sort of. Mostly it's just, don't wait. Don't wait for people to be ready to be helped. Don't wait for the tragedy to happen before you go looking for the person standing at the edge of it. I spent so much of my first life reacting, showing up right after the worst thing had already happened, and doing my best to clean up the wreckage. This time I want to show up before. I want to be the reason the wreckage never happens at all, as many times as I can manage it. A noble ambition, Kurama said, and there was, underneath the dryness, something that might genuinely have been respect. Also, likely, an impossible one. You cannot save everyone, Kit. I suspect you learned that the first time, however many decades it took you. Yeah, Naruto admitted, quiet and honest, into the dark. I did learn that. Took me a long time, and it cost a lot of people I love to teach me, but knowing I can't save everyone isn't the same as deciding not to try for the ones I actually can reach. That's the whole difference, I think, between giving up before you start, and doing the best you can with what you've actually got. Kurama was quiet for a long moment, turning that over the way Naruto imagined an old fox might turn over a particularly interesting scent. Very well, the fox said finally, and there was something almost gentle threading through the words, something that Naruto, even after only 2 months, had already learned to recognize as significant, coming from a creature who had spent centuries learning that gentleness was rarely safe to show. Then I suppose I will simply have to watch and see whether you manage it. It has been a very long time since anything in my long existence gave me a reason to be curious about what tomorrow might bring. That's all I'm asking, Naruto said, warmth spreading through his small chest like sunrise. Just stick around and see. That's all any of this ever really is, in the end. Sticking around, and seeing what you can build, one day at a time. Outside, somewhere beyond the orphanage's thin walls, Konoha slept under a sky that had, weeks ago, torn nearly open and had somehow, through the strange, stubborn persistence of the people who called it home, managed to close again. Naruto lay in the dark, 60 years and 2 months old all at once, and felt the fox's presence settle, for the first time, into something that was not quite peace but was, unmistakably, no longer only grief. A second cradle, he thought, echoing words that hadn't been spoken to him yet in this life but had been promised to him in a white, formless nowhere between one existence and the next. A second dawn. He closed his eyes, small and unfinished and impossibly full of a whole unlived future, and for the first time since waking into this strange, small, borrowed body, allowed himself, without reservation, to hope. Tomorrow, he knew, would come exactly the way tomorrows always did, one slow, ordinary, unremarkable hour at a time. There would be feedings, and diaper changes, and the long, humbling work of learning to hold his own head up, and none of it would look, to anyone watching, like the beginning of anything world-changing at all. But Naruto knew better. He had lived long enough, once, in a life that had ended on a cold ridge with the sky torn open above him, to understand a simple, hard-won truth, that every enormous thing the world ever built, every friendship, every peace, every hard-won ending, had started exactly this small. A single hand, curled trustingly around a single steady finger. A single conversation, offered patiently into the dark, until something wounded and wary finally answered back. He had all the time in the world now, or near enough to it. And this time, he intended to use every single hour of it. Watch me, he thought, to a village still sleeping, to a fox slowly beginning to trust him, to a future that had not yet decided what shape it would take. Just watch. I'm not gonna waste this, not one single day of it. And somewhere deep beneath his ribs, warm and enormous and, for the first time in a very long while, something almost like hopeful, Kurama's ancient presence curled a little closer, and, for the first time in the second life, did not pull away. The trouble with being a genius trapped in a toddler's body, Naruto decided somewhere around what he estimated to be his first birthday, was that nobody told you how slow everything would be. He remembered walking. He remembered it perfectly, remembered running, sprinting across rooftops, launching himself off tree branches with a Rasengan already spinning in his palm. His mind held 60 years of muscle memory, technique, timing, the accumulated physical wisdom of a man who had once moved faster than the human eye could properly track. None of it mattered even slightly when his legs simply refused to hold his own weight. He tried anyway, of course. Stubbornness, it turned out, was not a trait that faded with reincarnation. If anything, it seemed to have followed him back more faithfully than almost anything else. He pulled himself up against the leg of a low table in the orphanage's common room, wobbled, held for one triumphant half-second, and then pitched forward onto a rug that had, thankfully, been recently swept. "Oof," he said, muffled into the rug fibers. It came out as more of a garbled coo than an actual word. His mouth, like everything else about this small, unfinished body, was still years away from properly cooperating with the words his mind already knew how to form. Graceful, Kurama observed dryly, from somewhere deep in the warm dark beneath his ribs. Over the past 10 months, the fox's voice had become as familiar and constant a presence as Naruto's own thoughts. Gruff, sardonic, occasionally, when he thought Naruto wasn't paying close enough attention, almost fond. "Shut up," Naruto thought back, pushing himself up onto his hands again with the sheer bullheaded determination of a boy who had once climbed the entire face of a sheer cliff with nothing but chakra and spite to hold him there. "I got a whole extra second of standing that time. That's progress. You have been making progress for 3 months. Progress is progress, fuzzball." Kurama made a sound that was, unmistakably, the fox equivalent of an eye roll, and Naruto grinned, a real grin now, wide and gap-toothed and entirely his own, even if the face wearing it was barely a year old. It was strange, this particular flavor of humbling. He had faced down gods in all but name, had bled and nearly died more times than he could accurately count, had once held the combined chakra of 9-tailed beasts inside a single body, and used it to punch a moon-sized meteor out of the sky. And here he was, defeated soundly and repeatedly by a low table and his own uncooperative legs. But there was something underneath the frustration, too, something he was only beginning to properly notice, now that the sharpest edges of his grief over his old life had started, slowly, to soften into something more like memory and less like open wound. There was a strange, unhurried peace in having nowhere urgent to be. No war on the horizon yet. No mission clock ticking down. Just a low table, and a rug, and an entire uncomplicated afternoon in which the most important task in front of him was learning, one wobbling attempt at a time, to stand back up. He pulled himself upright again. Held for a second and a half this time. Grinned wider. "See," he told Kurama. Progress. By the time he properly turned to, a milestone the orphanage marked with a small, quiet cake that Atsuko baked herself, since none of the children in her care had families left to mark such days for them. Naruto had learned to walk with something approaching competence, had begun forming actual words with reliable frequency, and had started, very carefully, very quietly, to experiment with the one advantage that no amount of infant clumsiness could entirely take from him. Chakra, he remembered from his first life, roughly when his coils had first developed enough to be meaningfully trained, later than most clan children, whose families began careful chakra exercises practically from the cradle, but not so much later that a determined 2-year-old with 60 years of theoretical knowledge and Kurama's own deep well of chakra sitting warm and available just beneath the seal couldn't get a significant head start on the process. The problem, of course, was doing it without anyone noticing. He'd thought about this carefully, in the long quiet hours of toddlerhood when adults assumed he was simply playing or napping and paid him little direct attention. If word got out that the orphan son of the fourth Hokage, a parentage still officially sealed, though Naruto suspected, from certain careful looks Hiruzen sometimes gave him, that at least a few people in the upper echelons of the village already knew or strongly guessed, was displaying chakra control years ahead of schedule, it would draw exactly the kind of attention he did not want yet. Danzo's attention, for one, and Naruto had no illusions about how eager that particular old warhawk would be to get his hands on a prodigy Jinchuriki before the boy was even old enough to object. So he trained in secret. Small things, at first, barely anything at all, really, from the outside. He practiced simply feeling his own chakra, the warm, coiled sense of it sitting low in his belly, distinct but not yet separate from Kurama's much vaster reserve pressing against the seal like a second sun behind a curtain. He practiced the barest, most rudimentary edges of control, coaxing a thread of chakra to his fingertips and back, over and over, in the private dark of his crib at night, when the rest of the orphanage slept and no one was watching a toddler's hands glow faintly, briefly, blue. "You're doing that wrong," Kurama informed him, on one such night, with the air of a creature who had waited exactly as long as his patience allowed before commenting. "Wrong how? You are still trying to force it the way you did as an adult. Pulling chakra the way a grown man pulls a rope, hand over hand, all strength and stubbornness. This body cannot handle chakra that way yet. Its coils are too young, too narrow. You will tear something, if you keep pulling like that." Naruto paused, mid-attempt, the thin thread of chakra at his fingertips flickering uncertainly. "Okay. So how do I do it right?" "Slower," Kurama said, and there was something almost like patience in the word, a patience Naruto suspected the fox himself hadn't expected to still possess, after everything that had been done to him over the long centuries of his existence. "Do not pull. Invite. Let it come to the surface the way water rises in a cup you're filling, rather than the way you'd wring it from a cloth. You have time, Kit. You do not need to force a 2-year-old's coils to do a grown man's work. Let the body grow into the mind that is driving it, rather than dragging the body somewhere it is not ready to go." It was, Naruto reflected, turning the advice over carefully, exactly the kind of thing a much older, much wiser Kurama might have told him, except this Kurama was not yet particularly old in their relationship, not yet the deeply trusted friend Naruto remembered from decades down a road that might not even happen the same way twice now. This was a fox barely 2 years into learning that this particular human might actually be worth talking to, offering advice anyway, simply because, Naruto suspected, though he never have said it aloud and risked spooking the moment, because some old, buried, still healing part of Kurama had decided, quietly and without fanfare, that he did not actually want to watch this particular boy hurt himself. "Thanks," Naruto said, and meant it more than a single word could properly carry. "I'll go slower." He did. And within a few more weeks, the flicker of chakra at his fingertips had steadied into something closer to a genuine, controlled glow, nothing spectacular, nothing any observer would look twice at even if they happened to catch it, but real, and his, and built the right way this time, patient layer over patient layer, instead of forced. Hiruzen visited often, over those early years, more often, Naruto suspected, than official duty strictly required, though the old Hokage never said so directly and Naruto, still too young to safely voice half of what he understood, never asked. The visits followed a gentle, familiar rhythm. Hiruzen would arrive in the late afternoon, usually alone, sometimes with a small gift, a wooden toy, once, a picture book about the history of the village, its language pitched several years above what an ordinary toddler could follow, though Naruto suspected that was less an oversight and more a quiet, deliberate test. He would sit with Naruto for an hour or so, sometimes talking, sometimes simply watching him play, and each time Naruto could feel the old man's careful, patient attention settling on him like a hand testing the temperature of water before deciding whether it was safe to step in. "You're unusually watchful, for a child your age," Hiruzen said once, when Naruto was perhaps 2.5, sitting on the floor of the orphanage's small courtyard, ostensibly stacking wooden blocks but actually, as he often did in these quiet moments, listening with careful attention to every word the old Hokage let slip about the state of the village. Naruto looked up at him, blocks forgotten for a moment, and made a conscious, deliberate effort to let a little more of himself show than he usually risked. Not everything. Never everything, not yet, not until he had a much better sense of exactly how much the old man could handle knowing without it changing how he treated him, without it turning him into an asset to be managed rather than a child to be loved. But a little. A careful, curated glimpse. "I like listening," Naruto said. His vocabulary was developing faster than an ordinary 2-year-old should have, though he was careful to keep it just barely inside the range Tsuko and the other caretakers would write off as simply precocious rather than alarming. "You talk about important stuff. I want to understand it." Hiruzen's eyebrows rose, just slightly. "Important stuff," he echoed. "Such as? Like how the village is still fixing the wall by the east gate. And how there's a clan that's mad about something, but you won't say which one out loud around me." This last part, Naruto delivered with careful, deliberate innocence, watching closely for Hiruzen's reaction. He got exactly the reaction he expected, a brief, sharp flicker of surprise quickly smoothed back over into the old Hokage's practiced neutral warmth. "You have very good ears, for someone so small. Everybody always thinks kids don't understand stuff," Naruto said, with a small shrug that he hoped read as childish rather than as the calculated deflection it actually was. "But I understand lots of stuff. I just can't always say it right yet." It was, in its own way, entirely true, and Naruto had learned, already, in these first careful years of his second life, that the truest lies were always the ones built out of real things, arranged just carefully enough to point somewhere slightly different than where they'd actually come from. Hiruzen studied him for a long moment, long enough that Naruto felt a familiar, old thread of nervousness tighten in his small chest. The same wary alertness he'd have felt a lifetime ago facing down an opponent whose next move he couldn't quite predict. Then the old Hokage smiled, slow and a little sad, and reached out to ruffle Naruto's hair with one broad, weathered hand. "No," he said quietly. "I don't suppose you don't. I think perhaps you understand rather more than most give you credit for, and I think perhaps I ought to be more careful, in future, about what I let myself say in front of you." Please don't be, Naruto thought, with a sudden, sharp pang of something close to loneliness. "Please keep talking to me like I'm actually here. I know so much already. I don't need protecting from information the way an ordinary kid would. I just need somebody to talk to me like I matter, the way you always eventually did in the life I remember. I just want you to start doing it sooner this time." But he didn't say any of that, of course. He only ducked his head, let the moment settle into something quieter, and went back to stacking his blocks, careful and patient, the same way he was learning to be careful and patient with everything else in this strange, small, second beginning of a life. Kurama, over those early years, became something Naruto hadn't quite expected, not just a source of chakra, not just an old, wounded creature he was slowly, patiently coaxing back toward trust, but something closer to a genuine confidant, the one presence in his entire small, contained world who already knew, completely and without pretense, exactly who and what Naruto really was. It was, Naruto reflected more than once, a strange kind of gift. Everyone else around him, Tsuko, the other caretakers, even Hiruzen, even with all his careful, perceptive attention, related to Naruto as a startlingly precocious toddler, gifted, watchful, a little strange, but ultimately still a child whose full inner world remained, necessarily, hidden from them. Only Kurama, sealed within him, sharing the same body, the same breath, the same slow passage of days, knew the truth of the 60-year-old mind steering this small unfinished vessel. "Do you ever think about it?" Naruto asked once, late at night, close to his 3rd birthday, lying awake in the dark with Kurama's presence settled warm and familiar beneath his ribs. "The other life, the one I remember. Do you ever wonder what you were like in it? What we were like together?" "I have wondered," Kurama admitted, after a pause long enough that Naruto had nearly given up expecting an answer. Though I confess I find it an uncomfortable thing to wonder about. You speak of a version of myself who trusted you, who called you friend, who fought at your side, who wept, apparently, at your first death, though you have been oddly reluctant to describe that part of the story in much detail. Yeah, Naruto said, quiet. I don't really like thinking about that part too much either. The trouble, Kurama went on, ignoring the deflection with the particular gentleness of an old creature who understood exactly when not to push, is that I do not feel, inside myself, like that version of me. I do not yet trust you the way you say I once did. I am fond of you. I will grant that much, and only because you have made it genuinely difficult not to be, with your relentless, exhausting kindness. But fondness is not the same as the deep trust you describe. I wonder sometimes whether I am failing to become who I am meant to be, whether there is something wrong with this version of myself, that I have not yet arrived at the same place. Naruto turned that over carefully, feeling the old ache of it, because he recognized, with a sudden sharp clarity, that Kurama was voicing a fear that mirrored his own, buried deep beneath all his careful patience and forward momentum. I don't think there's anything wrong with you, he said finally, slowly, choosing each word with care. I think trust isn't a place you arrive at just because it happened once before. I think it's something you build, every time, brick by brick, and every time you build it, it's a little bit new, even if it ends up looking like something you built before. The Kurama in my old memory, he didn't trust me because it was inevitable. He trusted me because of 100 small choices, made one at a time, over years. And we're making those choices again, right now, just differently. Maybe slower in some ways, maybe faster in others, since I already know how good it can get, and I'm not gonna waste time being an idiot about it the way I was the first time. You were an idiot? Kurama asked, with unmistakable, dry amusement threading through the question. Oh, colossally, Naruto said, and felt something in his chest loosen at the sound of Kurama's low, answering huff of laughter, quiet, and a little rusty, like a sound the fox hadn't let himself make in a very long time. You have no idea. I yelled at you constantly. Called you names, tried to just rip your chakra out of you like you were a battery instead of a person. It took me way too long to even ask your actual name, and yet I ended up caring for you anyway, in this other life of yours. Yeah, then perhaps, Kurama said, quiet now, something old and careful and cautiously hopeful threading through the words. This time it will simply take less patience on my part, since you seem determined not to make quite so many of the same mistakes. I'm gonna try my best not to, Naruto agreed, and let himself smile into the dark, small and real and entirely his own. I've got a lot riding on getting this part right, this time around. There was another child at the orphanage, close to Naruto's own age, a quiet, watchful girl named Rin whose parents had died in the Kyuubi's attack, the same night, the same catastrophe, that had left Naruto himself here in the first place. She rarely spoke, rarely played with the other children, and Naruto, with 60 years of hard-won empathy pressing insistently against his small chest, found himself drawn to her almost immediately. He remembered distantly that this had not happened in his first life. He had been, by his own later admission, too wrapped up in his own loneliness as a very young child to reach outward much at all, and by the time he developed the capacity to notice other children's pain instead of only his own, Rin, if she had even been at the same orphanage the first time around, which he genuinely couldn't recall, had long since faded from whatever version of events had actually occurred. This time, he made a point of sitting beside her. You don't gotta talk if you don't want to, he told her, the first time, settling onto the ground a respectful distance away with a small collection of wooden blocks between them. I just figured maybe you don't want to be by yourself all the time. I don't like being by myself all the time either. Rin looked at him for a long moment, dark eyes wary and old beyond her years in a way that had nothing to do with any strange second life and everything to do with the particular, ordinary tragedy of losing everyone she loved before she was old enough to properly understand what losing meant. Everybody died, she said finally, flat and small. That's why we're here. Everybody who was supposed to take care of us died. Yeah, Naruto agreed, quiet and honest, because he had learned, a long time ago, in a life that hadn't happened yet for anyone but him, That the worst thing you could do for a grieving child was pretend their grief wasn't real or wasn't as bad as they knew it was. That's really unfair. It's okay to be mad about it. Are you mad about it? Naruto considered the question with more weight than a 3-year-old typically gave anything. Sometimes, he admitted. Mostly I'm just sad. But I think even though it's really unfair, and even though it really hurts, we still get to decide what happens next. Like, the sad part already happened. We can't undo it, but we get to pick what we build after it. That's still ours to decide, even if the sad part wasn't. Rin was quiet for a long moment, turning that over with the same careful, wary attention Naruto recognized, distantly, from every grieving child he'd ever counseled in his old life as Hokage. The particular way a wound so fresh made even kindness feel like something that had to be tested first, prodded carefully to see if it would hold weight before you dared lean on it. Okay, she said finally, and reached out, tentative, to take one of the wooden blocks from the small pile between them. I'll play. But only for a little bit. It was a small thing. A tiny, ordinary kindness, the kind that happened between children in orphanages the world over without anyone ever writing it into any history book. But Naruto, sitting there in the afternoon light with a quiet, grieving girl slowly, carefully building a wobbling tower of blocks beside him, felt something settle in his chest that had nothing to do with grand plans or world-altering interventions. This is what I want to build, he thought, watching Ren's small, careful hands stack one block atop another. Not just the big stuff. Not just stopping wars and saving famous people. This too, this ordinary, ground-level kindness, offered to people the history books will never even mention. Maybe especially that. Kurama, listening from beneath the seal, was quiet for a long moment. You did not remember her, the fox observed eventually. This girl? You said as much yourself? No, Naruto agreed. I didn't, and yet you sat beside her anyway. Spent your limited attention on someone whose story you cannot even predict, whose fate you have no special knowledge of, who may turn out to matter to nothing and no one beyond this single ordinary friendship. Yeah, Naruto said, watching Rin carefully add another block to her tower, tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Isn't that kind of the whole point, though? I'm not trying to just save the people I remember being important. I'm trying to actually be a good person, this time, to whoever's actually in front of me. The famous stuff, the massacres, the wars, all the big history, that matters, and I'm gonna do everything I can about it. But it can't be the only thing that matters. Otherwise, what's the point of any of it? Kurama was quiet again, longer this time, and when he finally spoke, there was something in his voice that Naruto hadn't quite heard from him before, something warmer, and a little wondering, like a creature encountering an idea he hadn't expected to find compelling and being surprised, despite himself, by how thoroughly it had landed. You are, the fox said slowly, a strange sort of human, Naruto Uzumaki. I have known a great many, across a very long life, and I do not think I have met one quite like you before, not even, I suspect, in whatever version of yourself lived that other life you remember. Is that a compliment? I am choosing to allow it to be one, Kurama said, with unmistakable, gruff fondness, and Naruto grinned, wide and unguarded, and went back to helping Rin rebuild her tower after it toppled, laughing softly at the small, delighted sound she made when it finally, wobbling, held. By the time Naruto turned 4, he had begun, very carefully, very deliberately, to lay the first small groundwork for the larger plans he carried with him from his first life. Always careful, always patient, never pushing further or faster than his small body and his still limited social standing could safely support. He could not yet do anything meaningful about the Uchiha clan's growing unrest. He was years too young, with no standing, no relationships, no plausible reason to have any insight into clan politics at all. He could not yet reach Gaara, sealed away behind the sand's borders and its own particular, separate tragedies. He could not yet do much of anything, really, beyond the small, ground-level work of simply becoming, patiently, a person other people might someday listen to. So that was what he focused on. Becoming someone worth listening to. He worked, quietly and consistently, on his chakra control, always careful never to display more skill than a gifted but ordinary child might plausibly possess. He worked, with equal quiet consistency, on his relationships, not just with Rin, though their friendship deepened steadily over that year, but with the other children at the orphanage too, the ones who'd once been near strangers to him in his first life, invisible in the wide, chaotic blur of his own loneliness. He made a point, now, of noticing them. Of sitting with the quiet ones, of standing up, small as he was, for the ones who got pushed around by older, rougher children. Of sharing, without being asked, whatever small treats or comforts came his way. It cost him nothing, materially. It earned him, slowly, steadily, something far more valuable than material things, a reputation, small but real, even at 4 years old, as a child who was kind, not merely tolerated, the way he'd so often been in his first life, when the whispers about the Kyuubi's container had followed him like a shadow he couldn't outrun, genuinely, warmly liked by the small circle of people who actually knew him. It wasn't everything. He knew, with the clear, unsentimental wisdom of 60 years of hard experience, that this small circle of orphanage goodwill would not, on its own, be enough to shield him from the wider village's fear once his parentage inevitably became known, or from the particular loneliness that came from carrying a burden almost no one around him could fully understand. But it was a foundation, a real one, built the slow, patient way, brick over brick, instead of the desperate, grasping way he'd once tried to earn love as a much younger, much more wounded version of himself. "You're different from most of the kids here," Etsuko told him once, catching him in a quiet moment, crouching down to his level with the particular warmth she reserved for the children she'd grown, over years of careful work, to love as much as any parent might. "Most children your age are still learning to share. You already know how, and you don't even seem to think about it. You just do it, like it's the most natural thing in the world. I just don't like seeing people sad when I could do something about it," Naruto said, with a small shrug that was, this time, entirely genuine. "It doesn't cost me anything to be nice." Etsuko's eyes went soft and a little damp, and she reached out to smooth his hair back from his forehead with a gentleness that reminded him, sharply and unexpectedly, of the way Kushina had would once, in some version of events he still hoped fervently to reach, held him close in a memory he'd only ever gotten to visit once, briefly, inside a seal, in another life entirely. "No," she agreed quietly. "I suppose it doesn't. Though I think most people forget that, the older they get. I hope you never do, little one. The world could use a great many more people who remember it." "I'll try not to forget," Naruto thought, leaning briefly into her hand before she straightened and went about the rest of her rounds. "I promise I'll try really, really hard not to forget." The Uchiha Clan crossed his path, for the first time in his second life, almost by accident, though Naruto, with 60 years of hindsight informing every choice he made, understood immediately that there was no such thing as an accident when it came to a family whose fate mattered as much to him as this one did. It happened at the edge of a public park near the orphanage, on an ordinary afternoon, when Naruto, 4.5 now, sturdy on his feet, chakra control developing steadily beneath the careful, patient guidance he and Kurama had built together over the past several years, was walking with Etsuko and a handful of the other orphanage children on one of their regular outings. He saw the boy first from a distance, small, dark-haired, sitting alone on a bench at the edge of the park, watching a group of older children play some game involving a ball with an expression that was, even from a distance, unmistakably lonely. Naruto's chest tightened with a recognition that had nothing to do with prophecy or foreknowledge and everything to do with simply seeing, immediately and completely, a child who badly needed someone to sit down beside him. It was only as he got closer, close enough to make out the boy's features properly, the particular set of his dark eyes, the crest stitched carefully onto the collar of his shirt, a fan split into red and white, that Naruto's heart nearly stopped in his small chest. Sasuke. He hadn't expected it, hadn't expected to encounter him this early, this incidentally, in a public park on an ordinary afternoon years before any of the events Naruto remembered from his first life were meant to unfold. But of course it made sense, once the shock passed and his 60-year-old mind caught up with what his eyes were telling him. Sasuke would have been born the same general span of years as Naruto in this timeline too, a little younger, if Naruto's memory of their original age gap held true, which would put this small, lonely boy somewhere around 3 years old, sitting on a bench, watching other children play a game he clearly wasn't included in. Naruto's feet were moving before he'd fully finished deciding to move them, Hey, he said, settling onto the bench beside the boy with the easy, unhesitant confidence of someone who had spent 60 years learning exactly how to approach a lonely child without spooking them. You looked kinda bored over here by yourself. Mind if I sit? The boy, Sasuke, though of course he had no way of knowing Naruto already knew his name, and Naruto was careful, immediately, not to use it before it had been properly offered, regarded him with a wariness that was, even at 3 years old, unmistakably familiar. The same wariness Naruto remembered from a much older Sasuke, guarded and careful and quick to assume the worst of anyone who approached him with an open hand. I wasn't bored, the boy said, a little defensively. I was watching. Okay, Naruto said easily, not pushing back on the obvious deflection. Can I watch too? I don't really know anybody here either. This last part wasn't even entirely a lie. The other children playing were strangers to him, whatever their names might turn out to be in a life still mostly unwritten. The boy was quiet for a moment, studying him with dark, careful eyes that seemed, even at 3, entirely too perceptive for his age, though Naruto supposed that made a certain kind of sense, for a child from a clan whose whole shinobi tradition was built around seeing more clearly than anyone else in the room. Fine, the boy said finally, grudging but not unkind. You can sit. They sat together for a while in comfortable, undemanding quiet, watching the older children's game unfold without either of them quite joining it. Naruto let the silence stretch, resisting every old instinct that wanted to fill it with reassurance, with warmth, with all the careful things he already knew this particular boy would eventually need to hear. Not yet. Not this early, not on a park bench with a stranger he'd known for 2 minutes. Trust, he reminded himself, the same lesson he'd relearned so patiently with Kurama, had to be built brick by brick, and pushing too hard, too fast, risked collapsing the whole foundation before it had a chance to properly set. My name's Naruto, he said eventually, when the silence had settled into something comfortable rather than awkward. Naruto Uzumaki. The boy considered this for a moment, weighing whether the offer was worth returning. Sasuke, he said finally. Sasuke Uchiha. Nice to meet you, Sasuke, Naruto said, and meant it with a depth the boy beside him could not possibly have understood. You wanna come play with the kids I'm here with? They're pretty nice. My friend Rin especially, she's quiet too though, so you guys might get along good. Sasuke hesitated, some old, careful calculation flickering behind his dark eyes, the same wariness, Naruto suspected, that came from being the youngest son in a proud, demanding clan, already learning, even this young, that attention and approval were things to be earned rather than simply given. Okay, he said finally, quiet but unmistakably a little hopeful, and slid off the bench to follow Naruto back toward the small cluster of orphanage children a short distance away. Later, watching Sasuke sit shyly beside Rin while the two of them built something out of sticks and pebbles in the grass, Naruto felt Kurama stir, thoughtful, beneath the seal. That is the boy, the fox observed. The one from your other life. The one whose clan you have spoken of, carefully, without ever quite finishing the story. Yeah, Naruto said, quiet and a little raw. That's him. You have not told me what happens to him. Or to his clan. No, Naruto agreed. I haven't. He watched Sasuke laugh. Actually laugh, small and surprised, at something Rin had said, a sound Naruto suspected the boy did not make often, and felt something in his chest tighten with a fierce, protective resolve that had nothing to do with careful long-term strategy, and everything to do with simple, uncomplicated love for a lonely child who deserved so much better than what history had once given him. I'm not ready to tell that story yet, Naruto said finally. Not even to you. It's a bad one, Kurama. One of the worst ones. But I'm not gonna let it happen again. Not this time. I've got years before it's supposed to happen, and I already found him early. That's gotta count for something. That's gotta be a good start. Kurama was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a gravity Naruto hadn't heard from him often, not even in the careful, deepening years of their rebuilt friendship. Then I hope, kid, the fox said slowly, that whatever good start you have found today proves enough. I have watched you carry a great deal of grief, in the short years I have known you, for tragedies that have not yet even occurred. I find, somewhat to my own surprise, that I do not wish to watch you carry the weight of this particular one twice. Me either, Naruto said, watching Sasuke's small, careful smile, and made a silent, fierce promise to a future he intended, with everything he had, to change. Me either, Kurama? Not this time. That night, lying in the dark of the orphanage with the day's small, enormous discovery still settling over him, Naruto found himself thinking, not for the first time, but with a new, sharpened clarity, about the shape of the years still ahead. He was 4.5 years old. He had, if the timeline held anything like the shape he remembered, perhaps 8 more years before the massacre he dreaded most would come due, 8 years to build whatever bridge might be strong enough to hold against it. 8 years before he'd enter the academy properly, 8 years before Team 7, before Kakashi, before the slow, careful work of becoming, once again, the shinobi this village would need. It sounded like a long time, laid out that way. It also, he knew from hard, aching experience, would pass faster than anyone standing at the beginning of it could properly imagine. I can't fix everything at once, he reminded himself, the same quiet mantra he'd been building, patiently, since the very first days of this second life. I can't run into the Hokage's office tomorrow and demand he investigate the Uchiha Clan's grievances, or track down Orochimaru's secret labs, or send word to Suna about a boy who hasn't even been born yet. I don't have the standing. I don't have the proof. All I'd do is scare everyone into treating me like a threat instead of a child, and lose whatever trust I've built before I've even had the chance to use it for anything that matters. So what will you do instead? Kurama asked, quiet and genuinely curious, in the particular tone he developed over the past year that Naruto had come to recognize as the fox actually, honestly invested in the answer rather than simply humoring him. The same thing I did today, Naruto thought, settling deeper into the small, warm blankets of his crib, watching the play of streetlight and shadow across the ceiling. Small things. Real things. Build friendships early. Learn everything I can, as fast as I safely can, without drawing attention I'm not ready for. Get strong, quietly, carefully, the smart way this time instead of the reckless way. And when the moments come, when I'm actually old enough, actually strong enough, actually trusted enough to matter, be ready to act. Not perfectly. I know I can't do this perfectly, not with something this big, this tangled. But better. Enough better that fewer people have to bleed for the mistakes I already know how to see coming. A modest ambition, Kurama said dryly, though there was no real mockery in it, only the particular fond exasperation Naruto had come to treasure, over these past years, as one of the truest signs of how far their bond had already come, even this early, even before either of them had fully caught up to the friendship Naruto remembered from a life not yet lived again. Yeah, well. Naruto let himself smile, small and tired and genuinely, thoroughly content, in a way that had nothing to do with the enormous weight of everything still ahead and everything to do with the simple, ordinary fact of a good day, well spent. Somebody's gotta aim high. Might as well be me. I've got the head start, after all. That you do, Kurama agreed, settling warm and steady beneath the seal, a presence that had become, in these 4.5 strange, patient, unrepeatable years, something closer to family than Naruto had quite let himself admit, even to himself, until this exact moment. Sleep now, Kit. Small hands need their rest, even when the heart driving them insists on staying up half the night making enormous plans. Yes, sir, Naruto thought, with a last, warm flicker of amusement, and let his eyes drift closed, the weight of the day settling into something like peace. Outside, Konoha slept on, unaware of the small, quiet promises being made and remade within its walls. A boy with an old man's heart, patiently, deliberately, brick by careful brick, beginning to build the foundation of a future he intended, this time, to hold. Tomorrow, Naruto thought, on the very edge of sleep, I'll go see if Sasuke wants to play again. It was considered against the enormous scale of everything still ahead, wars not yet fought, clans not yet saved, a whole tangled future still waiting to be rewritten one careful choice at a time. A very small plan indeed. But Naruto had learned, a long time ago, in a life that had ended on a cold ridge with the sky torn open above him, that every enormous thing the world had ever built had started exactly this small, and this time, he intended to build it right. The academy building looked exactly the way Naruto remembered it, and that, more than almost anything else in his strange second life so far, nearly undid him on the morning of his first day. He stood at the edge of the courtyard, 7 years old, small and sturdy in a plain gray shirt Atsuko had pressed carefully the night before, and stared up at the same worn stone steps he'd once climbed a lifetime ago. The same faded mural above the entrance depicting the first Hokage's face turned toward a rising sun, the same wide, sun-bleached training yard off to one side where he'd once, in another version of this exact morning, tripped over his own feet trying to impress a crowd of classmates who hadn't yet learned to like him. It's the same building, he thought, throat strangely tight. Everything's different, and this is exactly the same. You are being sentimental again, Kurama observed, not unkindly, from beneath the seal. It is only a building, Kit. Yeah, Naruto agreed, letting out a slow breath, willing the sudden thickness in his chest to settle. I know. It's just, a lot of stuff started here. Good stuff and bad stuff both. Feels strange, standing here again, knowing how different it's already going. Beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed, Sasuke shifted his weight and cast Naruto a sideways glance that was, even at 7 years old, sharp enough to catch the odd stillness that had come over his friend. You okay? Sasuke asked, low, the particular gruffness he used when he was worried about something and didn't quite know how to say so more plainly. 3 years of steady, patient friendship had worn some of the boy's careful reserve down to something warmer, though Sasuke remained, at his core, a child who preferred showing concern through small, practical gestures rather than open words. Yeah, Naruto said, and offered a real smile, because it was, mostly, true. Just thinking. Come on, we're gonna be late if we keep standing here. They walked in together, Sasuke a half step ahead the way he always managed to be, some old, ingrained clan instinct toward being first. Naruto suspected that even years of easy friendship hadn't quite untangled, and Naruto let himself, for just a moment longer, feel the full strange weight of it, a version of this morning that had never happened before, built out of 3 years of careful, patient, deliberate choices, walking now into a future genuinely, meaningfully different from the one he remembered. This is the good part, he reminded himself, following Sasuke through the wide double doors into the cool, familiar dimness of the academy's main hall. This is the part where all that patience starts actually paying off. Don't waste it being sad about the parts that used to hurt. Focus on building the parts that are gonna be better this time. The trouble with the academy, Naruto discovered within the first week, was not the material, which he'd already mastered decades ago, in a different classroom, under a different set of circumstances entirely, but the enormous, constant, exhausting effort of not mastering it too visibly. He remembered, distantly, being a genuinely terrible student the first time around, not because he lacked ability, but because nobody had ever bothered to teach him properly, because the isolation and neglect of his early years had left him without the patience, or the guidance to learn conventional lessons in a conventional way. This time, ironically, the problem was the opposite. He knew everything the academy had to teach, cold, and had to work almost as hard at appearing to struggle with it as he'd once, in another life, actually struggled. Uzumaki. Iruka-sensei's voice cut through the quiet of the classroom on the 4th day, and Naruto looked up from where he'd been deliberately, carefully fumbling through a basic chakra theory worksheet, making just enough small errors to look plausibly 7 years old, and not a single error more than that. Come work this problem on the board, please. Naruto felt a familiar flicker of warmth at the sight of Iruka, younger here, without the particular weathered kindness Naruto remembered from years down a road not yet traveled, but recognizably, unmistakably the same person, patient, a little overworked, clearly caring more about his students than the academy's modest salary strictly compensated him for. He walked up to the board, took the offered chalk, and deliberately, carefully solved the problem 2 steps slower than he could have, leaving one small, plausible error in his working that Iruka gently corrected in front of the class. Good effort, Iruka said, marking the correction with an encouraging nod. You're getting there, Uzumaki. Keep at it. Sorry, sensei, Naruto thought, settling back into his seat with the small, familiar ache of deception that had become, over these first days, a strange and constant companion. I know I'm not really getting there. I've been there for decades. I just can't tell you that yet. Beside him, Sasuke, seated by some quiet, deliberate arrangement Naruto had engineered weeks earlier by simply always sitting in the same spot until it became habit rather than choice, glanced over with a small, unreadable expression. "You made that mistake on purpose," Sasuke said quietly, once Iruka had moved on to the next problem. Naruto's stomach dropped, just slightly. Sasuke had always been observant, sharp-eyed even as a small child, the particular clan-bred perceptiveness that would, in another life, eventually develop into the terrifying analytical genius of a fully awakened Sharingan. Naruto had known, on some level, that hiding his true capability from Sasuke specifically would be harder than hiding it from almost anyone else. He simply hadn't expected the boy to catch him this early, this plainly. "What do you mean?" Naruto asked, carefully, buying time. "You always get things almost right," Sasuke said, low enough that only Naruto could hear. Dark eyes narrowed with the particular focused intensity Naruto remembered so well from a much older version of this same boy. "Almost, but not quite. Every single time. Nobody's that consistent by accident. Either you're the unluckiest kid in this whole class, or you're doing it on purpose." Naruto held his gaze for a long moment, weighing, the way he'd weighed so many careful decisions across these past 3 years, exactly how much truth this particular relationship could safely hold. "Okay," he admitted finally, quiet. "I'm doing it on purpose. Some. Not all the time. But some. Why? Because I already lived through all of this once, and I'm terrified of what happens if certain people figure out how much I already know before I'm ready for them to," Naruto thought, and said instead, carefully, "because some people get scared of kids who seem too different. And I don't want people scared of me. I just want to be normal enough that nobody looks at me too close, you know? At least for now." It wasn't the whole truth. But it was, Naruto reflected, an honest enough piece of it, because the fear of unwanted attention was entirely real, even if the reasons behind it ran far deeper and stranger than a simple childhood wish to fit in. Sasuke was quiet for a long moment, turning that over with the same careful, methodical attention he brought to everything, a trait Naruto suspected came directly from a clan that prized observation above almost every other virtue. "That's stupid," Sasuke said finally, though there was no real heat in it. "You should just be as good as you actually are. Who cares if people notice? Says the guy from the clan everybody already stares at," Naruto said, with a small wry smile, deliberately steering the conversation somewhere lighter before it could dig any deeper into ground Naruto wasn't ready to walk on yet. Sasuke huffed, something that might, in a slightly older version of the boy, have become an actual laugh. "Fair," he admitted, and let the subject drop, though Naruto noticed, with a small, private flicker of both fondness and unease, that Sasuke's dark eyes lingered on him a moment longer than strictly necessary before he turned back to his own worksheet, filing the observation away, Naruto suspected, for later, more careful consideration. "He's gonna figure me out eventually," Naruto thought, watching his friend's careful, focused profile. "Maybe not everything. But enough. I need to decide, sooner rather than later, exactly how much of the truth I'm willing to let him carry." The nights, at least, remained entirely his own. Naruto had, over the past 3 years, established a careful, private rhythm, waiting until the orphanage settled fully into sleep, then slipping quietly out through a window he'd long since learned to open without a sound, making his way to a small, secluded clearing in the forest a short distance from the village's outer edge, far enough from any regular patrol routes that he'd verified, over months of careful observation, he was unlikely to be noticed, close enough that he could return well before dawn without undue exhaustion. There, under the cover of full dark and Kurama's watchful, increasingly invested attention, he trained. It was slower going than he'd have liked. In some ways, his body, however diligently he pushed it, remained a 7-year-old's body, with all the physical limitations that entailed. But it was faster, in other ways, than almost any child in the history of the village had ever managed, because he already knew, with perfect clarity, exactly which exercises mattered and exactly how to perform them correctly the very first time, without the years of trial and error every other shinobi in training had to slog through. Tree walking came first, a technique most academy students wouldn't even attempt until their genin years, but one Naruto had mastered, in his old life, well before that, and one his current small body, with patient, careful chakra control built up steadily since toddlerhood, could manage now with only modest additional practice. Again, he murmured to himself, standing at the base of a broad, old tree in the clearing, chakra already gathering carefully at the soles of his bare feet. He ran up the trunk in 3 long, confident strides, held his position parallel to the ground for a long, steady moment, then dropped back down, landing in a low crouch that would have looked, to any observer skilled enough to judge it, remarkably accomplished for a shinobi of any age, let alone a 7-year-old still months from his first academy exam. Better, Kurama observed, with the particular gruff approval that had, over the years, become one of Naruto's most treasured small rewards. Your control has steadied considerably since last month. You are no longer wasting nearly so much chakra fighting your own coils. Feels good, Naruto admitted, a little breathless, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool night air. Feels like actual progress instead of just patience for its own sake. It is both, Kurama said. Progress built on patience. That has always been the only kind that lasts, in my very long experience, though I grant you humans rarely have the temperament to believe it until they have learned the lesson the hard way at least once. I already learned it the hard way once, Naruto pointed out, settling onto the forest floor to catch his breath properly, tilting his head back to watch the scattered stars visible through the canopy above. That's kind of the whole reason I'm doing it the patient way this time. So you have said? There was something warm, almost teasing, in Kurama's tone, the particular easy affection that had grown, steadily and without either of them quite marking the exact moment it happened, into something Naruto increasingly thought of, without hesitation, as genuine friendship. Not the deep, battle-tested bond of his first life, not yet, but something real in its own right, built patiently across these quiet years, brick by careful brick, exactly the way Naruto had once promised himself it would be. He lay there a while longer, letting the night settle around him, listening to the distant, ordinary sounds of the forest, insects, the rustle of some small nocturnal creature moving through underbrush, the far-off murmur of the village itself, still awake in scattered pockets even this late. 8 more years, he thought, watching the stars. Give or take. 8 more years before the massacre, if the timeline's still holding anything close to the shape I remember. I need to use every single one of them well. You are thinking about the Uchiha again, Kurama observed, not quite a question. Yeah. Naruto let out a slow breath. I've been watching. Careful, quiet watching, the kind that doesn't look like anything if anybody happened to notice. And I don't like what I'm starting to see, Kurama, even this early. Even years before it's supposed to actually happen. What Naruto had begun to notice, over these past months of careful, patient attention, was this, a slow, steady, deliberate estrangement growing between the Uchiha clan and the rest of the village, visible only if you knew precisely where and how to look. It showed in small things. The way Uchiha clan members, more and more, kept to their own district rather than mingling freely in the village's central markets the way they once had, according to older residents' occasional, wistful reminiscences. The way certain shinobi assignments seemed to route conspicuously around Uchiha operatives, even skilled ones, in favor of others of comparable rank. The way conversations sometimes died, subtly but unmistakably, when an Uchiha entered a room where non-Uchiha villagers had been speaking freely a moment before. None of it, individually, would have registered as significant to an ordinary 7-year-old, or even to most adults going about their ordinary business. But Naruto remembered, with painful clarity, exactly how all of these small threads eventually wove together into the catastrophe that had once unfolded. Remembered Itachi's own halting, grief-stricken explanation of the slow accumulation of grievances and suspicions that had, over years, hardened into something the clan itself had begun, quietly, to consider unforgivable, on both sides of an ever-widening divide. It's already starting, he told Kurama, quiet and troubled, one night in their forest clearing, having spent the earlier part of the evening not training but simply observing, drifting unobtrusively near the edges of the Uchiha district with the careful, deliberate innocence of a child who'd simply wandered a little too far from home. The distrust. I thought I'd have more time before I saw any real signs of it. But it's already there, Kurama. Small, but there. What do you intend to do about it? Kurama asked, and there was no mockery in the question, only genuine, careful curiosity. The fox had, over these years, developed a real investment in the outcome of this particular thread of Naruto's plans, Naruto suspected, precisely because he understood, better than almost anyone, exactly how much weight Naruto carried in relation to it. I don't know yet, Naruto admitted, frustration threading through the honesty. That's the problem. I'm 7 years old, Kurama. I don't have any standing. I can't march into the Hokage's office and say, hey, I've noticed some worrying social patterns developing between the Uchiha clan and the rest of the village. You should look into it, even if I somehow phrased it in a way a 7-year-old could plausibly have observed, which I'm not even sure I could manage. Nobody's gonna take that seriously coming from an orphan kid with no connections. And yet you have a connection the rest of the village lacks, Kurama pointed out. You have Hiruzen's genuine trust and attention. You have 3 years of careful, patient friendship with a member of that very clan. You are, in your own quiet way, already better positioned than most adults in this village to notice and eventually speak to exactly this problem. Naruto turned that over carefully, feeling the shape of an idea beginning, slowly, to take form. Sasuke, he said finally. I could ask Sasuke about it. Carefully. Not pushing, not interrogating him. Just paying closer attention to whatever he lets slip. He's 7 too, so he probably doesn't understand the full shape of what's happening any better than I do from the outside. But he lives inside it. He might notice things I can't see from where I'm standing. A reasonable start, Kurama agreed. Though I would caution you, Kit, to be careful how you use whatever he tells you. He trusts you. That trust was hard-won, over years of genuine friendship, and I do not think either of us wishes to see it spent carelessly on information gathering, however well-intentioned the ultimate purpose. Yeah, Naruto said, quiet, a little ashamed of how quickly his mind had leapt towards strategy rather than simple concern for his friend. You're right. I need to be careful about that. I don't want to turn our friendship into a source or whatever. He's my friend first. Whatever I learn from him has to come because he trusts me enough to share it, not because I went digging for it. Good, Kurama said, with quiet, genuine approval. That distinction matters more than you may currently realize, Kit. Hold on to it. The opportunity, when it came, arrived not through careful engineering on Naruto's part, but through the ordinary, unplanned rhythm of a genuine friendship, which was, Naruto reflected later, almost certainly exactly as it should have been. It happened on an afternoon several weeks later. The two boys sprawled in the shade of a large tree near the academy's training yard during a break between lessons, having just finished a rough, good-natured sparring match that Naruto had, with careful deliberation, allowed to end in a near draw rather than the decisive victory his actual skill could have produced. You've been weird lately, Sasuke said, apropos of nothing, staring up at the canopy above them with the particular flat directness he'd never quite lost, even after years of friendship softening some of his rougher edges. Not bad weird. Just thinking about something weird. You get this look. What look? Like you're somewhere else. Somewhere far away. Sasuke turned his head to study him, dark eyes narrowed slightly. You've had it a lot this week. Naruto considered, for a long moment, exactly how much of the truth this conversation could safely hold. I've been worried about something, he admitted finally, carefully. Nothing bad happened, don't worry. It's just, I've noticed some stuff about how people talk about your clan sometimes, and I guess I've been wondering if things are okay. At home. With everybody. Sasuke went very still beside him, the particular stillness Naruto remembered from a much older version of this same boy, the stillness of someone bracing for a blow they'd learned, through hard experience, to expect. What kind of stuff have you noticed? Sasuke asked, careful and guarded now, all trace of the earlier easy relaxation gone from his voice. Naruto weighed his next words with the same care he'd have once given a genuinely dangerous mission briefing. Just small things. The way some people go quiet when Uchiha Clan members are around. The way certain missions don't seem to go to Uchiha Shinobi as often as they used to, even really skilled ones. I don't know if it's anything. But it made me worried. For you. And for your family. Sasuke was quiet for a long, tense moment, and Naruto held very still beside him, giving the silence room to breathe, resisting every old instinct that wanted to fill it with reassurance before Sasuke had a chance to decide, on his own, how much he wanted to share. My father's been tense a lot lately, Sasuke said finally, low, almost reluctant, the words coming slow and careful like something extracted rather than freely offered. He and my brother argue sometimes, late at night, when they think I'm asleep. About the clan. I don't really understand all of it. Something about how the village doesn't trust us anymore, not the way it used to. Something about how the clan feels like it's been pushed to the edges of everything important. My father's angry about it. My brother, Sasuke's brow furrowed, some old, complicated worry crossing his young face. My brother seems sad about it, more than angry. He doesn't talk about it as much, but I can tell it's bothering him too. A lot. Naruto's chest tightened with a familiar, aching recognition. Itachi. Even here, even this early, already carrying the particular quiet grief of someone caught between two things he loved that seemed, increasingly, to be pulling apart from each other. Do you think it's gonna get better? Naruto asked carefully. The tension, I mean. Between your clan and the rest of the village. Sasuke was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the canopy above them with an expression far too old for a 7-year-old face. I don't know, he admitted finally. I hope so. I don't really understand why everybody's so upset. My family's not bad. We're not doing anything wrong. But everybody looks at us like we might be, sometimes, and I don't get why. Because history is a slow accumulation of small fears nobody addresses honestly until they've calcified into something much harder to undo, Naruto thought, with a grief that went far deeper than a 7-year-old's understanding should properly hold. Because your father's pride and the village's fear are gonna keep feeding each other unless somebody, somewhere, finds a way to actually build a bridge instead of just watching the gap get wider. I think, Naruto said carefully, aloud, that sometimes when people are scared, they don't always act like it makes sense. And sometimes the people they're scared of get scared right back. And everybody just kind of ends up more scared of each other instead of less, even though nobody actually wants that to happen. He paused, weighing his next words with real care. I don't think it's your fault, or your family's fault. I think it's just a hard, complicated thing that maybe needs somebody brave enough to try to fix it before it gets any worse. Sasuke turned to look at him properly then, dark eyes searching Naruto's face with an intensity that made him feel, for one uncomfortable moment, genuinely seen in a way he hadn't quite prepared for. You talk like you already know how it's gonna end, Sasuke said, quiet and strange, if nobody does anything. I do, Naruto thought, with a sharp, painful pang. I know exactly how it ends. I've watched it happen once already, and it's the worst thing I've ever seen. I don't know how it ends, he said instead carefully, honestly enough to hold up under Sasuke's sharp attention without quite crossing into the deeper truth he wasn't ready to share. But I know it doesn't have to end badly. Not if enough people try hard enough to stop it before it gets that far. I really believe that, Sasuke. And I'm gonna do whatever I can to help, if I can find a way. I promise. Sasuke studied him for a long moment more, something complicated and unreadable moving behind his dark eyes. Then, slowly, he nodded, not quite understanding, Naruto suspected, the full weight of what he was agreeing to, but trusting, on the strength of years of hard-won friendship, that Naruto meant every word of it. Okay, Sasuke said simply, and let the subject rest there, the two of them settling back into comfortable silence beneath the tree, the afternoon sun warm above them, a quiet promise now hanging, unspoken but real, in the space between two 7-year-old boys who understood, in their own very different ways, that something important had just been decided. That night, back in the small privacy of the orphanage, Naruto lay awake long after the rest of the building had settled into sleep, turning over the conversation with Sasuke, and everything it had confirmed, with careful, methodical attention. It's happening the same way, he told Kurama, quiet and troubled. Or close enough to the same way that I don't think I can afford to assume it'll just work itself out differently on its own. Fugaku's frustration. Itachi caught in the middle, torn between the clan and the village. The same slow, grinding accumulation of mutual suspicion. I thought maybe, I don't know, maybe I'd hoped that just being here, just existing differently in this timeline, might have already shifted things enough on its own. But it hasn't. Not this part, anyway. Did you truly expect it would? Kurama asked, not unkindly. You are 7 years old, Kit. However much wisdom you carry inside that small frame, You have had precious little actual influence yet over the broader currents of this village's politics. A friendship with one Uchiha boy, however genuine, was never going to be enough on its own to unmake years of accumulated grievance on both sides. Yeah, Naruto admitted, quiet. I know. I guess I hoped a little. That maybe I'd get lucky. That maybe things would just naturally go easier this time, without me having to do the really hard, dangerous parts. Nothing worth doing is ever quite that easy, Kurama said, with the particular dry wisdom of a creature who had lived long enough to have learned the lesson many times over, across many different lives and losses. You knew this, once you thought about it plainly enough. You have simply been putting off the harder question until now. What will you actually do about it? Naruto was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the familiar ceiling of his small room, turning the question over with real, careful weight. I think, he said slowly, working the idea out even as he spoke it, I need to talk to the old man. Not everything. Not the massacre, not the full truth of what I know. He wouldn't believe me even if I told him, and even if he did believe me, I don't think it'd actually help. It'd just make him treat me differently, maybe even dangerously differently, and I'm not ready for that yet. But I think I can tell him something. Carefully. Something true, framed the right way. That I've noticed tension. That I'm worried about my friend's family. Just enough to plant a seed. Enough that maybe, if he already has some awareness of the problem, my small observation might tip the scales toward him actually doing something about it sooner than he otherwise would have. A modest step, Kurama observed. But perhaps, given your current standing, the only truly available one. Yeah. Naruto let out a slow breath. I think you're right. I think it has to start small. Brick by brick, the same as everything else. You keep returning to that particular metaphor, Kurama noted, with unmistakable, gentle amusement. Bricks. You have used it, by my count, no fewer than a dozen times since I first began truly listening to your thoughts. It's a good metaphor, Naruto said, a small, tired smile tugging at his mouth despite the heaviness of the evening's earlier conversation. Everything big that lasts gets built one small piece at a time. Wars, peace, friendships, trust. I figure if I just keep reminding myself of that, I won't get so overwhelmed by how much is still ahead that I forget to actually do the next small thing in front of me. A fair philosophy, Kurama allowed, settling warm and steady beneath the seal, a presence that had become, across these years, as familiar and grounding as Naruto's own heartbeat. Sleep now, Kit. Tomorrow you may go build your next small brick. Tonight you have earned some rest. Naruto closed his eyes, the weight of the day settling slowly into something like peace, and let himself, at last, drift toward sleep, carrying with him, as he always did now, the quiet, unshakable resolve of a boy who remembered exactly how much was at stake, and had decided, patiently and completely, that he would spend every single one of these strange, borrowed years trying to change it. The conversation with Hiruzen came 3 days later, on one of the old Hokage's regular visits, though this time, at Naruto's own careful, deliberate request, relayed through Etsuko. They met not at the orphanage but in a small private garden adjacent to the Hokage's residence, a quieter, more discreet setting that Naruto suspected the old man had chosen precisely because he'd read, correctly, that whatever Naruto wanted to discuss carried more weight than their usual casual visits. You asked to see me somewhere private, Hiruzen said, settling onto a low stone bench beneath a flowering tree, gesturing for Naruto to join him. That's not like you, little one. What's on your mind? Naruto sat, choosing his words with the same careful precision he'd have once brought to a genuinely delicate diplomatic negotiation, which, he reflected, in its own small way, this very much was. I've been worried about something, he said slowly. And I wasn't sure if it was my place to say anything, but I figured you'd rather know, even if it turns out to be nothing, than not know and have it turn out to matter. Hiruzen's expression sharpened slightly, the easy warmth of the old Hokage's usual manner giving way to something more focused, more attentive, the particular quality of listening he reserved. Naruto knew from long observation, from matters he judged genuinely important. Go on, Hiruzen said quietly. My friend Sasuke, Naruto began, careful to keep his voice light, ordinary, a child's honest worry rather than anything more calculated. From the Uchiha Clan. We've been friends for a few years now, and lately, I don't know, he seems worried. About things at home. He mentioned his father's been really tense, and arguing sometimes, late at night, with his brother, about how the clan feels like it's being pushed to the edges of things. Not trusted the way it used to be. He paused, watching Hiruzen's face carefully. I noticed some stuff too, on my own. Small things. The way people go quiet sometimes when Uchiha Clan members walk by. It made me think, I don't know. It made me worried that maybe things are worse than most people realize, between the clan and the rest of the village. And I thought you should know. In case it's something that needs, I don't know, attention, before it gets any worse. Hiruzen was quiet for a long, waited moment, and Naruto held very still, watching the old Hokage's face for any flicker of reaction that might tell him whether this careful, small offering had landed the way he'd hoped. You are, Hiruzen said finally, slowly, remarkably perceptive, for a 7-year-old. This is not the first time you have surprised me with observations well beyond your years. But I confess this particular one troubles me more than most, precisely because it happens to align rather closely with concerns that have already crossed my own desk, from sources considerably better positioned than a child's friendship to know the full shape of the matter. Naruto's heart gave a sharp, hopeful lurch. So it's real, then? The tension. It's actually a real problem. It has been a growing concern for some time, Hiruzen admitted, with a heaviness that suggested this was not a topic he discussed lightly, or often, with anyone. One I have been attempting to address through careful diplomatic channels, though I confess progress has been slower than I would like, and the clan's frustration, and I will be honest with you, certain elements within the village's broader shinobi and civilian population who harbor their own unfounded suspicions, continues to accumulate faster than my efforts have thus far managed to counterbalance. He studied Naruto for a long moment, something searching and careful in his gaze. May I ask what prompted you to bring this to me now specifically? You have known of your friendship with young Sasuke for some years. What changed that made you feel this conversation could not wait? Naruto felt the careful, precise weight of the question, and chose his answer with equal care. I guess, he said slowly, I just started noticing it building. Not all at once. Slow over time, the way you notice a crack in a wall getting a little wider each time you look at it, even if no single day shows much difference. And I got scared that if nobody said anything, if everybody just kept assuming somebody else was handling it, the crack might get wide enough that it couldn't be fixed anymore. I didn't want to wait until it was too late to matter. Hiruzen's expression, at that, softened into something complicated, pride, and worry, and a particular weary respect that Naruto recognized, with a small ache, as the exact way the old man had once looked at him, decades from now in a life not yet lived, when Naruto had finally grown old enough to earn that particular regard through genuine hard-won wisdom rather than a 7-year-old's precocious insight. That is, Hiruzen said quietly, a wiser instinct than most adults in this village currently possess, little one. I am grateful you brought it to me, and I want you to know that I take it seriously, both the observation itself, and the courage it took to voice it. He paused, weighing his next words carefully. I cannot promise you an easy or immediate resolution. These are old wounds, tangled with pride and fear on more sides than I think even you, perceptive as you are, currently fully appreciate. But I promise you I will renew my efforts, with fresh urgency, in light of what you've shared with me today. And I would ask, if you continue to notice things, through your friendship with young Sasuke, that seem relevant to this matter, I would be grateful if you felt able to bring them to me. Not as a spy, understand. I would never ask a child to betray a friend's trust for information, only as someone whose care for his friend gives him a perspective the rest of us, standing outside that friendship, simply cannot access. I can do that, Naruto said, quiet and sincere, relief loosening something tight in his chest that had been coiled there for weeks. I want to help. However I can. I don't want anything bad to happen to Sasuke's family. Or to the village. I want everybody to be okay. Hiruzen reached out and rested one broad, weathered hand gently on top of Naruto's head, the same gesture, Naruto realized with a sudden, sharp pang, that the old man had used countless times across a whole other lifetime, a small, steady anchor of comfort that had meant more to a lonely, orphaned boy than Hiruzen himself had ever fully understood. You have a good heart, Naruto, the old Hokage said quietly. A remarkably good heart, for someone who has already had so much taken from him. I hope this village proves worthy of it, in time. I intend to do everything in my power to make certain it does. It already is worthy of it, Naruto thought, throat tight with an emotion too large and too complicated for a 7-year-old's simple words to properly hold. You're worthy of it, old man. You always were. I just wish I'd understood that sooner, the first time around. Thank you, he said instead, quiet and small, and let himself, for just a moment, lean into the old man's steady, comforting presence, feeling, for the first time since this whole strange, patient, second life had begun, like the small, careful bricks he'd been laying, one at a time, might genuinely be building towards something real. Walking home from the Hokage's residence in the fading afternoon light, Naruto felt Kurama stir, thoughtful and warm, beneath the seal. That went better than you feared, the fox observed. Yeah, Naruto agreed, a small, genuine smile finding its way onto his face despite the day's earlier heaviness. It really did. He already knew, Kurama. Not everything, not how bad it eventually gets, not without me telling him more than I'm ready to yet. But he knew it was a real problem, already working on it, already worried. That's actually huge. That means I'm not starting from nothing this time. I'm not the only one who sees it coming. It also means, Kurama pointed out, with careful, measured caution, that the outcome no longer rests solely on your shoulders, which I suspect, whether you fully recognize it yet or not, is something of a relief to you as, well, Naruto considered that, turning it over with the particular honesty he'd learned, across these years, to bring to conversations with Kurama specifically, a rare space where he rarely bothered pretending to feel anything other than exactly what he actually felt. Yeah, he admitted finally, quiet. It is a relief. I think some part of me has been carrying this whole thing like it was entirely my responsibility to fix, all on my own, just because I'm the only one who remembers exactly how badly it goes wrong if nobody does. But that's not actually true, is it? The old man's been working on it too, in his own way, this whole time. I'm not alone in this. I never really was. No, Kurama agreed, warm and steady. You were not. Though I understand, better than you might expect, precisely how easy it is to forget that, when you have spent so long believing the whole weight of everything rests on you and you alone. Naruto glanced inward, at that, recognizing the particular shape of old grief threading through Kurama's words, centuries of isolation, of being treated as a weapon rather than a person, of carrying an entire species' fear and hatred as though it were somehow his own burden to bear rather than simply an injustice done to him. You're not alone either, Naruto said, quiet and fierce. Not anymore. Whatever else happens, however this whole thing turns out, you've got me now, Kurama. For real. Not just as a host. As a friend. I mean that. There was a long silence from beneath the seal, long enough that Naruto wondered briefly if he'd overstepped some careful boundary either of them had quite named yet. Then, quiet and a little rough, carrying a warmth Naruto had rarely heard from the great fox before, Kurama spoke. I know, he said simply. I have known for some time now, Kit, though I confess I have been slow to properly say so aloud. Thank you? Naruto smiled, small and warm and entirely genuine, and walked the rest of the way home through Konoha's gold, fading light, carrying with him the quiet, unshakable certainty that whatever difficulties still lay ahead, and he knew, with hard-won clarity, that there would be many, he was no longer facing any of it entirely alone. Behind him, the Hokage's residence caught the last of the day's sun, and somewhere within its walls, an old man who had once, in another life, watched too many precious things slip through his fingers before he understood how to hold them, sat quietly at his desk, turning over the careful words of a remarkable 7-year-old boy, and began, with renewed and genuine urgency, to draft the first of several careful proposals aimed at mending a wound he had, until today, believed he still had ample time to address. He did not know, could not have known, exactly how much time truly remained before that wound might tear open beyond any careful mending. But he knew now, with a clarity Naruto's quiet warning had sharpened considerably, that the matter could not wait as long as he had once, complacently, assumed. Somewhere in the quiet, ordinary rhythm of an evening that looked, to any outside observer, entirely unremarkable, the first true bricks of a genuinely different future had, very carefully, very deliberately, begun to be laid. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm, one Naruto found himself, somewhat to his own surprise, genuinely enjoying despite the enormous weight still pressing at the edges of everything he did. Academy lessons continued, and Naruto continued his careful, practiced mediocrity, though he allowed himself, now and then, small deliberate flashes of insight, answers just a shade too perceptive for an ordinary 7-year-old, calculated risks meant to keep Iruka-sensei's attention without tipping over into anything that might draw real scrutiny. It was a delicate balance, one he adjusted constantly, like a man walking a tightrope who had long since stopped noticing the height beneath him but never once forgot it was there. "You're improving quickly," Iruka told him one afternoon, marking up a written exam with the particular quiet satisfaction of a teacher watching a struggling student find his footing. "Whatever you've been doing differently, keep doing it. You've got real potential, Uzumaki." "Thanks, sensei," Naruto said, ducking his head to hide the complicated mixture of guilt and fondness the praise stirred in him. He liked Iruka, had always liked Iruka, in both lives, with an affection that ran deeper than the man himself likely ever fully appreciated. It felt strange, deceiving him even in this small, careful way, however necessary the deception might be. "You worry too much about the small deceptions," Kurama observed, catching the drift of Naruto's thoughts as he so often did these days, their connection having grown steadily more fluid and effortless across the years. "You are not harming him. You are simply protecting yourself from attention you are not yet ready to receive. There is a difference, Kit, between a lie that wounds and a careful silence that protects." "I know," Naruto thought back, watching Iruka move on to the next student's paper with the same patient care he brought to every one of them. "Doesn't always make it feel better, though." "No," Kurama agreed. "I don't imagine it does. But few worthwhile things feel entirely comfortable, in my experience." "You have said as much yourself, more than once." Naruto huffed a small, silent laugh at having his own words turn back on him, and let the matter rest. Sasuke, for his part, seemed to relax somewhat in the weeks after their conversation beneath the tree, not because the tension at home had eased, Naruto gathered from careful, occasional observation, but because he no longer seemed to be carrying the worry entirely alone. He mentioned his family more often now, and small, unguarded fragments dropped between ordinary conversations about academy lessons or sparring technique, and Naruto made a careful practice of listening without pressing, letting Sasuke set the pace of what he chose to share. "My brother took me somewhere yesterday," Sasuke offered one afternoon, apropos of nothing, as the two of them walked home together after lessons let out. "Just the two of us. He doesn't usually have time for that anymore. He's always busy with missions, or with clan stuff." "Yeah? Where'd he take you?" "Just to watch the sunset, from a spot up near the Naka shrine." Sasuke's expression, for a moment, softened into something Naruto rarely saw on his friend's face, a simple, uncomplicated warmth, entirely free of the careful guardedness that had, over the past weeks, become an increasingly familiar shadow over the boy's features. "He used to take me there a lot, when I was really little. He hasn't in a long time." "It was nice." "That sounds really nice," Naruto said, and meant it with a depth that went far beyond the simple, easy warmth of the words themselves. Itachi's trying, he thought, a fierce, hopeful ache blooming in his chest. Even with everything else weighing on him, he's still trying to hold on to that piece of things. "That's good. That's really, really good." He remembered, with painful clarity, how in his first life this same relationship had curdled, slowly and then all at once, into the worst kind of tragedy, a brother who loved deeply enough to choose an unbearable sacrifice, and a boy left with nothing but grief and a hatred built on a lie he wouldn't learn the truth of for years. If there was any chance at all, of holding on to moments like this one, sunsets shared, ordinary time simply spent together, Naruto intended to do everything in his power to protect it. "Maybe he'll take you again sometime," Naruto offered. "Sounds like it made you both happy." Sasuke's mouth curved, just slightly, into something that was almost a smile. "Yeah. Maybe." Not every development, over those months, moved in a direction Naruto found reassuring. He noticed it first in small fragments, pieced together from careful, patient observation over several weeks. A subtle stiffening in how certain non-Uchiha villagers spoke about the clan when they thought no one important was listening, a wariness that seemed, if anything, to be hardening rather than softening even as Hiruzen's quiet diplomatic efforts continued behind closed doors. Naruto understood, with the hard-won clarity of a man who had once governed this very village, that Hiruzen's efforts, however genuine, however well-intentioned, moved at the necessarily deliberate pace of formal diplomacy, constrained by protocol and competing political pressures in ways that a single 7-year-old's warning, however perceptive, could not simply dissolve overnight. "It's not gonna be enough," he admitted to Kurama one night, troubled, lying awake long after the orphanage had settled into sleep. "What I told the old man. It helped. I really do think it helped. It got him moving faster, paying closer attention. But it's not gonna be enough on its own. Not against years of accumulated distrust that's had time to calcify on both sides." "You knew that already," Kurama pointed out, not unkindly. "You said as much yourself, the night you decided to speak with him at all." A modest step. Not a solution. Yeah. Naruto stared up at the familiar ceiling, turning the problem over with the same patient, methodical attention he brought to every difficult puzzle these days. "I guess I just hoped it might do more than it has. I keep having to relearn that patience, even when I already know I need it. That is, I think," Kurama said slowly, "simply what it means to genuinely care about an outcome, rather than merely calculate toward one. If you did not hope for more than careful patience could reasonably deliver, I would worry rather more about you than I currently do." Naruto let out a soft, tired laugh at that, some of the evening's heaviness easing at the particular gruff comfort in Kurama's words. "When do you get so good at saying the right thing, fuzzball?" "I have had 4 years of steady practice. Listening to a boy who insists on narrating his every feeling directly into my presence whether I ask for the privilege or not," Kurama said dryly, and Naruto laughed again, properly this time, muffling the sound against his pillow so as not to wake anyone else in the orphanage. "Fair," he admitted, still smiling into the dark. "Guess you've earned some credit for putting up with me this long." "A very great deal of credit," Kurama agreed, warm beneath the dryness, and Naruto let himself, finally, drift toward sleep with that small, comfortable exchange settled warm in his chest, a reminder, even amid everything still uncertain and still difficult ahead, that he was not carrying any of it entirely alone. He found Rin again, one afternoon several weeks later, sitting by herself at the edge of the orphanage's small courtyard, watching a handful of younger children play some simple game with an expression that mixed genuine fondness with the particular quiet remove she still, even after years of friendship, sometimes retreated into. "Hey," Naruto said, settling onto the ground beside her, the same easy familiarity that had marked their friendship since they were barely 3 years old. "You've been quiet lately. More than usual, even for you." Ren glanced at him, a small, wry acknowledgement crossing her face at being so easily read. "I've been thinking about graduating," she admitted. "About what happens after. Most of the other kids here talk about it like it's exciting. Becoming a genin, getting assigned to a team, finally getting to do something that matters. I don't know if I feel that way." "How do you feel?" "Scared, mostly." Ren pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture Naruto recognized from years of watching her navigate difficult feelings, a small, protective posture that had softened considerably over the years of their friendship, but never entirely disappeared. "Everybody who was supposed to take care of me is already gone. If I become a shinobi, if I go on missions, that's dangerous, Naruto. What if something happens to me too? Who's even left to be sad about it, if it does?" The question landed with more weight than Ren likely intended, striking directly at an old, familiar grief Naruto carried from his own first life, the particular loneliness of believing for years that he had no one who would truly mourn him if the worst happened. "I would," he said, quiet and fierce, meeting her eyes directly. "I'd be sad about it. Really, really sad, Ren. You're not alone, even if it sometimes feels that way. You've got me. You've got Itsuko-san. And half the kids in this orphanage who think you're basically the coolest, quietest person they know. You matter to people, real people, right now, not just some someday when you've got a whole family built back up around you." Ren's eyes went bright and a little wet, and she looked away quickly, blinking hard, the particular embarrassed vulnerability of a child unused to being told, plainly, that she mattered. You always know exactly the right thing to say, she said, a little unsteadily, half accusation and half genuine gratitude. It's kind of annoying, honestly. Naruto laughed, soft and warm. I've had a lot of practice thinking about this stuff, he admitted, which was, in its own strange way, entirely true. I don't want you to be scared alone, that's all. Whatever happens, whenever we both graduate and go off and do shinobi stuff, you're still gonna have people who care what happens to you. I promise. Ren was quiet for a long moment, then reached out, tentative, to bump her shoulder gently against his. The closest thing to an open display of affection either of them typically allowed themselves, born of years spent as two quiet, careful children who had learned early that loud emotion sometimes felt like more than either of them could safely hold. Thanks, she said simply, and Naruto bumped his shoulder back, and the two of them sat together in comfortable silence, watching the younger children play, while the afternoon light slowly gilded the courtyard gold around them. This is worth it too, Naruto thought, watching Ren's expression slowly ease back into something calmer, something closer to peace. Not just the big history-changing stuff. This too. Every single ordinary kindness, offered to whoever needs it, whether the history books ever notice or not. That evening, walking back from the Hokage's residence after a brief, unscheduled visit, Hiruzen had sent word asking to see him, a rare enough occurrence outside their usual regular meetings that Naruto had felt a small flutter of nervous anticipation the whole walk over. Naruto carried with him a piece of news that settled, warm and hopeful, somewhere deep in his chest. I wanted you to know, Hiruzen had told him, seated behind his broad desk with a weariness that seemed, nonetheless threaded through with something like cautious optimism, that the concerns you raised some weeks ago have borne some fruit. I have arranged a formal council specifically addressing the clan's grievances, real ones, substantive ones, not merely symbolic gestures. It will take time yet to see whether it accomplishes what I hope it might. These things move slowly, and I will not pretend to you that the wounds involved are shallow ones. But it is a genuine start, Naruto, and I do not believe I would have moved with quite this urgency without your warning to spur me toward it. That's really good, Naruto had said, relief and hope tangled together in his chest. Thank you for taking it seriously. Thank you for trusting me with it, Hiruzen had replied, with a warmth that had settled deep and comforting in Naruto's chest the whole walk home. It's not everything, Naruto reminded himself now, walking the familiar streets toward the orphanage as the sky deepened toward evening. It's not gonna fix everything overnight. There's still years of work ahead, still a real chance things could go badly no matter how hard everybody tries. But it's a start. A real one. And I helped make it happen. You did, Kurama agreed, warm beneath the seal. And you will continue to help make many more such starts, across the years still ahead of you, one small brick at a time, exactly as you have promised yourself you would. Naruto smiled, small and tired and genuinely, thoroughly hopeful, and walked the rest of the way home beneath a sky slowly filling with stars, carrying with him the quiet, unshakable certainty that whatever difficulties still lay ahead, he was building something real, patiently, carefully, one small choice at a time, toward a future genuinely, meaningfully better than the one he remembered. Behind him, Konoha settled into evening, unaware of the small, careful promises being kept within its walls. Ahead of him, years of careful work still stretched out, uncertain and unwritten, waiting for a boy with an old man's heart to keep building, brick by patient brick, toward whatever future he could manage to earn.